Chapter 801, Dispute on the Snowfield. The wind roared beneath the low, leaden clouds, casting a gloom so profound that even the heavy snow blanketing the world couldn't brighten it. Everything was desolate. In the distance, snow-covered mountains stood silently, their presence a testament to the dead silence that enveloped the land. Only a few barren trees dotted the nearby wilderness, and the cold wind, sharp as a sword, seemed to erase all traces of life. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Suddenly, the steady sound of footsteps on snow broke through the eternal howling of the wind, infusing the lonely world with a hint of vitality. Beneath a dead tree on the hillside, a snow-colored bird pushed aside the snow, sealing its nest, its ruby-like eyes peering curiously out. Atticus Blaine paused, glancing at the tree hollow, and smiled before continuing up the gentle slope. Looking back, the town he had left behind, after a day and night of travel, was now a blurry, almost invisible speck on the horizon. The cotton-like snowflakes falling from the sky had already covered his footprints, leaving only those nearby, clear and distinct. "We've come so far," Atticus mused to himself with a wry smile, which quickly faded as he turned his gaze forward. There, on the edge of a cliff, stood a black tower, enduring the loneliness of being forgotten by the world. The towers lined up in rows, and through the majestic castle, one could vaguely glimpse the arrogance of its past. "Nurmengard," Atticus murmured, his voice tinged with emotion. He pulled his hand from his coat pocket, bringing it to his lips to warm his fingers. "Oh my gosh, it's so cold here. I can't imagine retiring in a place like this," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the tallest black tower. He seemed to see something, though it was unclear. After a brief pause, Atticus was about to take another step. Nurmengard was now within sight. He could have simply apparated there, but for reasons unknown even to him, he chose to walk, savoring each step. Just as he was about to place his foot on the ground again, he sensed something and hesitated, pulling back and raising his brows to look behind him. Bang! 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 A series of sharp sounds echoed across the snowfield. Through the falling snow, a group of people appeared not far behind Atticus, their arrival marked by a noise that the wind quickly carried away. In the distance, the snow on the recently emerged mountain peaks trembled, creating visible gaps in the snow cover. The group soon spotted Atticus on the small slope. Without delay, they supported each other, trudging through the snow with difficulty. "Wait, Blaine!" the leader shouted before they even got close. "Oh my God!" Atticus exclaimed softly, surprised by the large group of people at the foot of the hill. "What are you all doing here?" About a dozen people had gathered at the base of the hill. Kingsley led a group of aurors from the British Auror Office, accompanied by representatives from the German Ministry of Magic and wizards from the International Confederation of Wizards, identifiable by their diverse appearances but uniform attire. Atticus even noticed a few reporters with cameras, and among them, Louise stood next to Kingsley, her expression filled with concern. "What are we here for?" the leader, another vice president of the International Confederation of Wizards, began to explain. Atticus Blaine's old friend, Vip Dregern, was visibly furious. Despite Vip's once formidable skills, age had taken its toll. The long journey to deliver the bad news had left him weary, evident in the lines etched across his brow and the fatigue in his eyes. Yet, his anger was palpable as he confronted Atticus. "Of course, we're here to stop you from making a grave mistake, Blaine. Do you even realize what you're doing? Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" Vip shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "Of course I know, Vip," Atticus replied with a calm smile. "You know." Vip nearly cursed, but years of maintaining a composed image held him back. His eyes, bloodshot with frustration, betrayed his struggle to keep his temper in check. "Perhaps you think you're invincible, Blaine, and that's why you dare to challenge him. But let me tell you, the most dangerous wizard in history is imprisoned in Nurmengard. I doubt you've heard his story or understand the devastation he's caused. This is not comparable to the so-called mysterious man. If you intend to use him to prove your authority and strength, Blaine, you're making a colossal mistake." Vip didn't allow Atticus a moment to respond. "The murderer who attacked your student has been caught and is dead. Let this be the end of it. It's time to let go of your anger, Blaine. Don't let this spiral out of control." "You seem to think I'm here to challenge the owner of this castle?" Atticus tilted his head, a hint of amusement in his eyes as he regarded Vip. "Isn't that it?" Vip exclaimed, his anxiety evident. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Atticus replied, his gaze drifting down the hillside to the faces filled with worry and awe. "I want to enter Nurmengard because I suspect the mastermind behind the attack on Hermione Granger is hiding inside." "You don't know him well enough, Blaine," Vip gasped, his voice rising. "Though he's evil, he wouldn't stoop to harassing a young witch. It's beneath his pride." "I'm not referring to Gellert Grindelwald," Atticus clarified calmly. "I believe it's Anton Vogel's grandson, Adam Vogel, who is currently hiding in that castle." This revelation took many by surprise, but Kingsley, standing nearby, seemed to understand Atticus's motives for coming to Nurmengard. "Regardless," Vip continued, overwhelmed by the day's events, "you can't enter Nurmengard, Blaine. You have no right. No wizard has set foot in that castle for half a century. I am still the vice president of the International Confederation of Wizards. Am I not?" Atticus countered. "We have no rights either, Blaine," Vip insisted, his tone unyielding. "The only person authorized to enter or grant entry is Dumbledore." Atticus glanced at Kingsley, who subtly shook his head. Kingsley had followed Atticus's instructions and hadn't informed Dumbledore. However, the events in the Berlin suburbs the previous night had been widely reported. With Dumbledore's extensive network, he likely knew more than most, even more than the German Ministry of Magic was willing to disclose to the public. "In that case," Atticus sighed, a sound that made Vip and those behind him tense with anticipation. They realized that sheer numbers wouldn't deter Atticus Blaine. "Fawkes!" Atticus called out, and a burst of brilliant sparks erupted above his head, echoing like an avalanche. Fawkes raised his head and let out a clear, melodious cry. In the crowd, Louise's eyes widened as she gazed at the magnificent bird perched on Atticus Blaine's shoulder, her expression filled with admiration. "What is that?" she whispered, tilting her head in curiosity. Kingsley, however, remained silent, offering only a cautionary glance in response. "Deliver a message for me, Fawkes," Atticus said, gently stroking the bird's beak. He looked into Fawkes's eyes, which gleamed like rubies, and continued, "I wish to enter Nurmengard, and I require Principal Dumbledore's authorization." Fawkes affectionately pecked Atticus's cheek, comforted by the warm magic emanating from him. With a piercing cry, Fawkes vanished from sight, leaving the crowd in awe. Moments later, sparks flickered in the air, and Fawkes reappeared, his tail feathers ablaze and gracefully swaying as they descended. Amidst the intensifying roar of the snowfield, a slightly peculiar and hoarse voice resonated in everyone's ears. "I, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, grant Atticus Blaine permission to enter Nurmengard." End of this chapter. Chapter 802, Your Instructions. Dumbledore's voice of approval echoed across the snowfield, causing many of the wizards who had gathered to stop Atticus Blaine to exchange puzzled glances. The leader, Vip Dregern, wore a sinister expression as he pursed his lips and took a few deep breaths. "I think Dumbledore must be mad," he exclaimed. "So be it," Atticus replied with a smile, as Fawkes's tail feathers ignited into flames, illuminating the sky. "I don't think this will take long. You can wait for me here, or perhaps it would be wiser to head to a nearby tavern for a glass of whiskey to warm up." No one wanted to leave, of course. If they couldn't prevent Atticus Blaine from entering Nurmengard, they certainly didn't want to miss the battle of the century. After casting one last glance at the silent crowd, Atticus turned to make his way toward Nurmengard. "Wait!" someone suddenly shouted from the crowd. Atticus turned to see Louise, her eyes meeting his. The attention of so many wizards made Louise nervous, her heart pounding like a wild horse. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. Looking up at Atticus on the hill, she took a deep breath. "Be careful," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Atticus raised an eyebrow in surprise, and Louise nodded. "I heard from Kingsley about what the Dark Lord Grindelwald has done." Her voice faltered for a moment, and she smiled sadly. "You have to come back safely. I also heard how you dealt with muggles who witnessed magic, so if..." Snowflakes gently settled on the hair of this ordinary yet extraordinary muggle girl. She lifted her pale face, her eyelashes adorned with crystal droplets formed by her breath. "If I'm going to lose my memory, then I want you to do it yourself." Atticus's mouth twitched, as if he wanted to smile but couldn't quite manage it. The reporters who had come to witness the event were so excited they nearly shouted. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment between Atticus and Louise. In their eagerness to find the perfect angle, Louise's colleagues in the wizarding world were pushed aside. "All right," Atticus finally nodded, turning to the excited reporters with a playful warning. "Please refrain from broadcasting this part." While the reporters puzzled over his words, Atticus turned and resumed his journey. The wind and snow suddenly intensified, swirling across the vast snowfield and obscuring everyone's view. Atticus walked slowly and steadily, drawing ever closer to Nurmengard. A sudden clap of thunder under the gloomy sky startled everyone. A layer of dark, leaden clouds had gathered beneath the already overcast sky, flickering with dizzying flashes of lightning. A thunderstorm seemed to be brewing, an unusual occurrence for Nurmengard, still gripped by the cold of winter. As Atticus Blaine approached Nurmengard, the thunderclouds seemed to follow his footsteps. Vip Dregern felt a heavy weight settle in his heart, as if he were witnessing the European magical world teetering on the brink of another turbulent war. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, but finally Atticus, surrounded by snow, stood before the dark iron gate. He brushed the snow from his cloak and looked up at the words, "For the greater good," engraved on the cold castle. With determination, he opened the door to the prison. As if a sound-dampening spell had been cast, the howling wind and snow became a distant murmur as he stepped into this place, exiled from the world. The vast courtyard was lifeless, enveloped in a deathly silence. The door to the main castle stood open, inviting him in. The luxurious decorations and past ambitions lay buried deep beneath the ice and snow. Instead of rushing upstairs, Atticus Blaine stood in the dripping, frozen entrance hall, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. The scent of decay filled his nostrils, transporting him back half a century to a time when the flames of war spread across the world. Wizards, now reduced to withered bones in their graves, once held dreams that, though arrogant, made them masters of their era, deserving of the respect that briefly crossed his mind. Nurmengard had no guards. The castle's owner and its sole prisoner had chosen to remain here voluntarily. Was it a thwarted dream or betrayal that had destroyed him? The spiral staircase leading to the tower's summit was covered with a thick layer of ice. As Atticus stepped onto the stairs, the ice beneath his feet melted into snow water, nourishing the dormant seeds hidden in the gaps between the bricks and stones. Atticus ascended slowly, pausing occasionally to gaze at the snow-capped mountains. Here, there were no seasons, no time. Loneliness was the eternal theme of Nurmengard. The ice on the spiral staircase melted under Atticus's steps, and the snow water flowed down, washing the stone steps and restoring their deep color. The clattering sound inexplicably breathed some life into Nurmengard. With a quickened pace, Atticus climbed to the top of the building. A short, narrow platform led to a room with a wooden door at the end. After a brief pause, Atticus withdrew his hand from his coat pocket and approached the room. The rusty door hinges turned slowly, emitting a sharp, piercing noise. The force required to open the door made the thin panel tremble. As the door swung open, a gust of air tousled Atticus's gray hair. The stone room before him was not overly cramped, about half the size of Atticus's office at Hogwarts. However, the walls, rough desks, and newspapers stacked under the wooden bed occupied much of the space, making the room appear narrow. There was more than one person inside. An old man sat on the bed's edge, engrossed in a newspaper. His hair was gray, and beneath his washed and faded dressing gown, his frail body seemed ready to collapse at any moment. His clouded eyes remained fixed on the newspaper, oblivious to Atticus's entrance. Atticus turned his attention to the other occupant. This man, also elderly, appeared more dignified than the thinly dressed old man. He wore a dark gray woolen coat, and his half-gray hair and neatly trimmed mustache lent him an air of respectability. Despite the elegance suggested by his gold-rimmed glasses, a trace of madness lingered in his brown eyes. Atticus stepped into the room, ignoring the old man absorbed in his newspaper, and focused on the wizard bowing before him. His expression was calm, but his voice carried a lightness. "Mr. Augusta Laman, is that correct?" Adam Vogel, a man of many faces and identities, did not meet Atticus's gaze. Yet under Atticus's scrutiny, he He removed his glasses and slowly knelt on one knee before Gellert Grindelwald. His expression was one of deep reverence, and his voice brimmed with fervor, like a devotee worshipping a holy figure. "Adam has done your bidding," he declared. End of this chapter. Chapter 803. Please join the game. Atticus Blaine once again turned his attention to the frail old man lying beside the bed. This man, once an ambitious revolutionary and one of the most powerful wizards in modern magical history, had set off a storm that swept the Dark Lord across much of the wizarding and muggle worlds, making Albus Dumbledore a legendary name. Gellert Grindelwald, however, had now become an inconspicuous old man. It was hard to believe that he had once been on par with Dumbledore. The old man beside the bed had lost his power, and Atticus felt that the magic flowing through his frail body was even less abundant than that of Filch. No one had tortured the defeated Gellert Grindelwald. The power of magic comes from the heart, and with his faith destroyed, his magic had faded. Atticus stared into Grindelwald's calm eyes. The only things in his world were himself and the newspaper in his hand. The impostor Augusta Rahman, whose true identity was Adam Vogel, knelt on one knee before Gellert Grindelwald, as if worshipping a holy figure, his eyes filled with enthusiasm and hope. He did not glance at Atticus Blaine, but in his heart he held great expectations for what Blaine would do. Rumble! The sound of avalanches crashing against the cliffs mixed with the thunder rolling in the low, leaden clouds, shattering the silence of Nurmengard. Yet nothing happened. Atticus Blaine stood calmly behind the door, neither unleashing the wrath of thunder nor drawing his wand, while the old man beside the bed turned a page of the newspaper, quietly reading the Daily Prophet. Reporter Rita Skeeter was critical of the fact that Barty Crouch Sr. had taken an extended sick leave and had not moved into St. Mungo's. Time passed. Bang! The pair of square-framed, gold-rimmed glasses that Adam Vogel held in his hand fell to the ground, bounced a few times, and landed under the simple desk in the room. As if someone had ripped out his spine, Adam Vogel's fanatical look vanished. His face turned gloomy as he stared blankly at the old man reading the newspaper. The halo filter in his eyes was gone, and it seemed he had just realized that the man before him was merely an old man waiting to die. A trace of ridicule finally appeared on the corner of Atticus's mouth. "Let me guess," Atticus said slowly, approaching Adam Vogel, who was lying on the ground. His eyes lowered, and he spoke calmly. "From beginning to end, the curse attack on Hermione Granger was a cover. This unfortunate young witch was only targeted because of her identity as a Triwizard Tournament champion. You thought I was behind this." Adam Vogel remained silent, his spirit and gentlemanly demeanor lost. Atticus could feel the magic fading from his body. "Your target has always been me or Dumbledore," Atticus continued, his tone cold. "You don't care about Hermione Granger's life or death, but you knew that after her accident, Dumbledore and I would be furious and would do everything in our power to uncover the truth and punish the instigator. You ordered your adopted daughter to go to the goblins and participate in the gambling game, placing an obviously unreasonable bet. You wanted to leave clues. You were well aware of Dumbledore's connections and my relationship with the goblins. If Dumbledore and I hadn't succeeded in directing our attention to your organization, this clue would have successfully led us to you, eventually." Atticus glanced at Grindelwald. "We would find Nurmengard." Adam Vogel's lips moved, but he said nothing. "You want Dumbledore and me to walk into this cage that no one has set foot in for half a century." Atticus concluded. "You want us to believe that Grindelwald orchestrated the attack on Hermione Granger. The Grindelwald you imagine, the Grindelwald you've heard about, is arrogant. He wouldn't bother to explain that another war of the century is about to erupt here. Whether Grindelwald defends himself or not is irrelevant. Eventually, he will be inspired by me or Dumbledore, and he will rise, leave Nurmengard, and lead you into a new holy war." Adam Vogel's voice was hoarse, like a traveler stranded in a desert under the scorching sun, parched and desperate. Atticus Blaine looked down at Vogel. To be honest, he felt a certain admiration for the man. Vogel must have known that once the investigation into Hermione's attack began, their organization and those wizards still clinging to that arrogant, unattainable dream would inevitably be exposed. This was the wealth that these people, who had been hiding for half a century, had worked so hard to preserve. Yet Vogel was willing to sacrifice it all to invite the prisoners of Nurmengard to come out. His intelligence was commendable. Jasna Rosier and Angus Aeschylus were clearly chosen for the mission after careful consideration, but in the end, he failed. It wasn't due to the wisdom of Atticus and Dumbledore. The ultimate reason for his failure was his mistaken belief that Gellert Grindelwald was still alive. "You betrayed yourself," Adam Vogel said, ignoring Atticus's analysis. He looked at Gellert Grindelwald with despair. It was time to settle the matter, and Atticus had no confusion or interest in saying anything further to Adam Vogel. With a flick of his fingers, Atticus summoned the square eye that had fallen beneath the table into his hand. He gazed deeply into it for a long moment. Then, a burst of flames engulfed the eye, and amidst a faint roar, it melted away, leaving not even a trace of ash. "I won't kill you," Atticus said calmly. "Go to Azkaban." A flash of red light followed, and Adam Vogel collapsed unconscious to the ground. The sound of avalanches echoed against the cliffs, and fine snowflakes surged from the base of the cliff to the edge. Nurmengard was enveloped in swirling snow and fog. Atticus stood before his desk, gazing at the mountains, quietly admiring the scenery he had never seen before. The thunderstorm in the sky grew more ominous, and the frightening light of lightning dispersed the snow clouds, diluting the chill in the air. After a while, Atticus lost interest in the view outside the window. It was too lonely. In comparison, he preferred the view from his office window at Hogwarts. From there, he could see not only the coldness of the mountains and the depth of the forbidden forest, but also the young wizards enjoying themselves on the lawns and Quidditch pitch. "I'm going back to Hogwarts," Atticus said, turning around and slipping his hands into his pockets. He glanced at Gellert Grindelwald, who seemed oblivious to the events in the room, lost in his own world. His tone was friendly, as if bidding farewell to an old friend. "Is there anything you want me to say to Dumbledore?" The wrinkled hands holding the newspaper remained steady, but the wind rushing into the room made Grindelwald's gray hair and the newspaper tremble. Yet he did not lift his eyes, which were veiled with a layer of white mist, nor did he utter a sound. "So," Atticus smiled. He took something from his pocket and gently placed it on the cluttered desk, filled with newspapers. "I wish you good health, Mr. Grindelwald." With that, Atticus did not linger any longer and left the room. Atticus Blaine strode out of the cell with Adam Vogel. Inside, the old man quietly flipped through the newspaper, turning page after page until the sky over Nurmengard darkened with thunderclouds, casting a shadow as deep as night. When the dim light made it impossible to read, he finally folded the newspaper and stood up slowly. He moved to the desk and gazed blankly at the empty snowfield in front of the Nurmengard gate, where no one remained. The silence was profound and unbroken. His weary eyes fell upon a gold pocket watch on the table, a keepsake left by Atticus Blaine. Without touching the watch, the old man seemed to sense its presence. Suddenly, the mechanism of the pocket watch clicked open, revealing a photograph of another old man and a young girl. Their faces were hauntingly familiar. Unable to resist, he reached out, picked up the pocket watch, and brought it closer to his eyes, staring intently at the image. As time passed, his hand began to tremble. Outside, rain began to fall on Nurmengard, a place frozen in time and ice throughout the year. End of this chapter. "Rita," Atticus Blaine responded, his voice steady and authoritative. "The Wizarding Society indeed bears a responsibility. We must acknowledge our failures in allowing such an organization to thrive for so long. It is imperative that we learn from these mistakes to prevent future tragedies. The Ministry of Magic, along with international bodies, is committed to implementing stricter regulations and oversight to ensure the safety of both the Wizarding and Muggle communities." The reception hall of the British Ministry of Magic was filled with a tense energy, the air thick with the weight of recent events. Atticus Blaine stood at the forefront, flanked by the British and German ministers of magic, as well as Vip Dregern and the venerable goblin, Barna Gerson. Their expressions were a mix of solemnity and resolve, reflecting the gravity of the situation. Kingsley Shacklebolt, standing tall behind Amelia Bones, surveyed the room with a keen eye. Memories of past press conferences, particularly the one following the defeat of the notorious werewolf Greyback, flitted through his mind. His gaze landed on Dolores Umbridge, her pink suit a stark contrast to the somber mood. Her eyes, cold and calculating, sent a shiver down his spine. As the 3 minutes of silence concluded, the room erupted into chaos. Reporters clamored for attention, their voices rising in a cacophony of questions. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks, momentarily blinding Atticus as he faced the onslaught. "Mr. Blaine," a burly reporter bellowed, pushing his way to the front. "Do you support sentencing those dark wizards to death?" Atticus raised a calming hand, his demeanor composed. "As I mentioned earlier, the decision on sentencing is not for one individual to make. The Ministry of Magic, in collaboration with the International Confederation of Wizards, will establish a temporary tribunal. This body will meticulously evaluate each case, ensuring that the punishment fits the crime." Another voice pierced the din. "What about the punishment specifics?" "The consensus is still forming," Atticus replied. "However, preliminary discussions suggest that those guilty of severe crimes will face imprisonment in Uxta or Azkaban. The duration of sentences is under negotiation, and the possibility of capital punishment for the most heinous offenders remains. Lesser crimes will incur substantial fines and restrictions on movement, with regular reporting to the ministry required." Rita Skeeter, her makeup slightly askew, managed to capture Atticus's attention despite her diminutive stature. Her assistant hoisted her up, allowing her to meet his gaze. "Do you think the Wizarding Society needs to be held accountable for this?" she asked, her tone as incisive as ever. "An excellent question, Rita," Atticus acknowledged. "Indeed, the Wizarding Society must take responsibility. We must confront our shortcomings and ensure that such an organization can never again take root. Our commitment to reform and vigilance is unwavering, for the protection of all." "Miss Skeeter," Atticus Blaine nodded in approval, maintaining a serious demeanor. "We need to approach this issue rationally. Firstly, my personal opinion is that we should collaborate with the Muggle government to provide a reasonable explanation and offer appropriate compensation to the families of the Muggles who lost their lives. After all, their lives were taken by wizards, and they deserve an explanation. Regarding whether the ministries of magic from various countries or even the International Federation of Wizards should be held accountable for negligence, I believe we should not be overly harsh. As I mentioned, this organization has existed for a long time, influenced by certain historical factors, and they have developed very clever methods to conceal themselves." Listening to Atticus's defense of the official ministries of magic, even Vip Dregern secretly breathed a sigh of relief. In this matter, the only person qualified to defend the ministry was Atticus Blaine. Despite the barrage of sharp questions, Atticus remained calm, responding in an orderly manner and providing watertight replies. "The formation of the Provisional Tribunal will be chaired by Vice President Vip Dregern," Atticus concluded. "The Ministry of Magic, the Order of Merlin Jury, the Anti-Dark Magic Alliance, and other organizations will each appoint a member to serve on the tribunal. We will also invite some well-known figures from the magical community, and we aim to complete all the review work before Easter." However, the reporters in the audience were not satisfied. They were eager to uncover the secrets behind the incident. For instance, what historical factors did Atticus refer to regarding the existence of this organization? In the battle that caused a huge commotion in the suburbs of Berlin, Atticus mentioned killing some dark wizards who resisted fiercely. How many were there? Why did the German Ministry of Magic and the Federation jointly blockade the area known to Muggles as Sachsenhausen? Furthermore, Atticus claimed that these dark wizards used Muggles for experiments. What kind of experiments were they, and what methods were used? Atticus did not address many of these questions. However, Ministry of Magic employees, who had been briefed by Atticus in advance, ushered the reporters to a large banquet hall, offering them fine wine, good food, and small gifts of little value. "I still think," Vip, with a complicated expression, approached Atticus as he watched the reporters being escorted away. "It would be more appropriate for you to serve as the Speaker of the Provisional Tribunal, after all." Atticus raised his hand to stop Vip from continuing. "I am a professor, Vip. My primary responsibility is to teach. Moreover, there are many tasks awaiting my attention, and I simply don't have the time." Vip fell silent, eventually nodding in agreement. "I want to apologize to you, Mr. Blaine." The old goblin Banna approached Atticus, speaking with a hint of unease. Regarding that unreasonable bet, the goblins should have taken the initiative to inform. Perhaps in doing so, Miss Hermione Granger could have avoided harm. If possible, I hope you can convey the goblin's apology to Miss Hermione Granger. I have heard she is a witch of excellent moral character and academic performance. If she is interested, Gringotts would be willing to open its doors to her after she graduates from Hogwarts. These high-level officials were privy to much more information than the public. "Don't be too hard on yourself, Banna," Atticus reassured him. "Even with the combined wisdom of 10 Dumbledores, it's impossible to foresee all the conspiracies in the world." Atticus Blaine gently patted the anxious goblin on the arm, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm planning to visit St. Anselm Mungo's to see her after the press conference. I'll make sure to extend the invitation to you," he said warmly. Everyone seemed eager to speak with Atticus. Even Cornelius Fudge approached him, exchanging a few brief words. However, Atticus noticed the way Fudge glanced back at him with a hint of apprehension before quickly moving on to converse with the German Minister of Magic. It was clear that Fudge's unease around Atticus had only grown. "Mr. Blaine," Kingsley Shacklebolt said as he approached Atticus. Having overheard the conversation between Atticus and the goblin, Kingsley leaned in to quietly remind him, "Before you head to visit Hermione Granger, remember that Miss Louise Aundair is still waiting for you." End of this chapter. Chapter 805. Dream as if overnight, London had transitioned from the cold, damp grip of winter to the gentle embrace of spring. A comforting breeze danced along the Thames, its surface mirroring the clear blue sky above. Across the river, the cheerful laughter of a group of foreign tourists exploring London roused Louise from her reverie on the balcony. She watched them depart, their figures gradually fading into indistinct silhouettes against the horizon. Several pots of ornamental flowers on the balcony had begun to sprout new buds, swaying vibrantly in the life-filled breeze. Yet Louise only cast them a fleeting glance before turning her gaze away, her interest waning. Her eyes settled on the glass door separating the bedroom from the balcony, reflecting her slightly somber expression. She didn't need anyone to tell her. Louise knew that the uproar caused by that nefarious organization would linger in the wizarding world for some time. Atticus Blaine's reputation would inevitably ascend another rung on the ladder. In many ways, the magical world mirrored her own. But for Louise, it was all behind her now. Since returning to London, Atticus had placed her in the Auror safe house, where she had initially been sheltered. Now, she understood what an Auror's duties entailed. Although her involvement in the investigation of Fraser's death spanned only about 10 days, as a reporter, Louise recognized the significance of the information she had gathered. In those 10 days, she had formed a preliminary understanding of the magical world in her mind. Click, Louise turned the knob and stepped into the bedroom. "What a luxury," she murmured, taking in the room's classical and opulent decor. This villa, situated in a prime viewing area of the Thames, must have cost a fortune. Yet the wizards had acquired it as a temporary base for the Aurors, a testament to their considerable wealth. How did they manage the identity issue? Louise wondered, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Magic can handle everything, after all. With a soft thud, Louise collapsed onto the plush four-poster bed, covering her eyes with her arms. The past 10 days of constant activity had drained her energy. Despite sleeping in that morning, she still felt utterly exhausted. Every cell in her body seemed to cry out for more rest, but no matter how hard she tried, sleep eluded her. Atticus's voice echoed persistently in her mind. Pointless. That was what Atticus had said to her before she set off, in response to her fervent request to accompany him. Now, she understood why he had said it. "It's so unfair," she whispered, pressing her arms tightly against her heated eyes, her faint voice resonating in the room. Boom! A sharp ringing sound pierced the quiet villa, and Louise, who had been lying motionless for over an hour, sprang from the bed at the noise. Her recent experiences had taught her what this sound signified. Do. Sure enough, footsteps approached from outside the door, growing clearer until they halted just beyond it. Then came a knock. Louise's heart raced as she heard it, her grip on her sleeves tightening, a hint of fear creeping in. "May I come in, Louise?" Atticus's gentle voice called from outside. After a prolonged silence, Louise responded with a slightly hoarse voice, granting permission. She stood at the head of the bed, her hands clenched tightly, her eyes red with a mix of resistance and fear. "Are you done with your work?" she asked, preempting Atticus before he could speak, her voice tinged with an indescribable emotion. Atticus Blaine entered the room with a gentle smile, his voice soothing as he spoke. "Oh, there's no need to worry," he began, though his words belied the troubles that weighed on him. "In truth, there are quite a few issues left unresolved. Many people are urging me to oversee the trials of those dark wizards, but I simply don't have the time or energy for it. I've received news from St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies that my student has recovered, but I still need to visit her. And Remy, remember, I asked Kingsley to bring Onisterpass back to London. Torre is also in the hospital, and if possible, I hope to find a way to restore him to normalcy. The school is organizing a large-scale magic competition, and the second event is fast approaching. There's so much to handle, and my teaching schedule is falling behind." Atticus sighed, shaking his head in resignation. As he voiced his endless concerns, Louise listened quietly, her initial unease giving way to a slight sense of relief, though she remained silent. Observing the girl's reserved demeanor, Atticus felt a heaviness in his heart. He wanted to offer words of comfort, but they remained unspoken, as he realized they might not make a difference. "The experience felt like a dream," Louise finally said, breaking the long silence with a soft smile. "But now, it's time to wake up." Her bright eyes met Atticus's, her eyelashes fluttering. "Will erasing my memory hurt?" "It won't," Atticus assured her with a smile. "There's a slight risk of memory loss leading to dementia, but you know my magical skills are exceptional. I should be able to eliminate such risks, and even if something unfortunate happens, I have the means to provide compensation." Louise giggled, her spirits lifted by Atticus's gentle humor. As she regained her composure, courage filled her eyes. Atticus continued softly, "Kingsley will handle the rest. He'll return Fraser to you using plausible explanations. You and your family will also receive compensation for the troubles caused by the wizarding world." Louise nodded, though a shadow of sadness crossed her face. The bright scenery outside the window couldn't dispel the melancholy that lingered in the room. "Can I?" She hesitated, then looked directly at Atticus. "Can I not forget you?" Atticus sensed her apprehension and quickly reassured her. "Of course, Louise. You can remember our first meeting at the subway station in the city center." Louise's face brightened with relief. "Thank you," she said softly, though she seemed to have more on her mind. "Is there anything else you'd like to say?" Atticus prompted gently. Louise hesitated, her cheeks flushing with a hint of shyness. Gathering her courage, she asked, "Could you close your eyes?" Atticus was momentarily taken aback, but he saw the hopeful anticipation in Louise's eyes. As the light in the room began to fade, he nodded and closed his eyes. Louise's heart raced, her pulse quickening with disbelief that Atticus had agreed. The bright sunshine finally pierced the dim bedroom, casting a warm glow. With her cheeks flushed as red as roses, she stood on tiptoes and slowly. As the distance between them diminished, Louise felt the warmth of her breath mingling with his. She closed her eyes, anticipation heightening her senses. Perhaps their lips would meet, or maybe just the tips of their noses would brush against each other. It was a fleeting touch, as delicate as a dragonfly skimming the surface of a pond. When Louise opened her eyes, she was met with the sight of two purple moons blossoming before her, captivating her mind completely. End of this chapter. Chapter 806, Recovery. Life is a one-way journey. The scenery along the way, the people you meet, and the experiences you encounter, whether cherished or despised, accompany you only for a certain period. Eventually, they fade into the distance as you continue to grow. Loneliness is the natural state of life. Atticus Blaine floated 100 feet in the air, quietly observing Louise, who was laughing and playing with her colleagues behind the glass curtain wall. A hint of loneliness lingered in his eyes. He thought, let this girl, innocently caught up in all this, enjoy her happiness a little longer. Kingsley can wait before contacting her. The strong wind tousled his soft gray hair. Atticus pressed his head, looked up at the blue sky, took a deep breath, and stepped into the void to continue his journey. At St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, the hustle and bustle were constant, much like any muggle or wizard hospital. At noon, therapists in dark green smocks barely had time to sit and enjoy a proper lunch. It was routine for them to lean against the corridor walls, hastily eating from their lunch boxes. Clang! A loud shout echoed from the fourth floor, overpowering the usual hospital noise. Therapists eating in the fifth-floor corridor dropped their lunchboxes and rushed downstairs. Hermione was accustomed to the noise at St. Mungo's. An extra desk had been added to the otherwise plain ward. Golden sunlight streamed through the high window, illuminating the chaotic dance of dust particles disturbed by Hermione's steady breathing. She turned to glance at the therapists running outside the door, curiosity flickering in her eyes. However, she resisted the urge to join the commotion and refocused on her studies. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since she left Hogwarts. As a senior, the coursework had accelerated significantly. The thought of the homework she had missed made it impossible for Hermione to rest peacefully. When the curse on her body suddenly lifted 2 days ago, restoring her energy, she immediately expressed her desire to return to Hogwarts. However, Sirius and Tonks strongly opposed the idea. After some negotiation, Sirius went to Hogwarts to fetch her textbooks. He also brought messages from Harry, Ron, and other classmates who were concerned about her health and eager to hear of her recovery. "Your friends can't wait to see you," Sirius said, handing over the school bag he had struggled to carry. Hermione's cheeks flushed with happiness as she took it, already envisioning her return to school. Yet challenges awaited her. The missed courses and assignments needed to be caught up on, Hermione thought as she lay at her desk, multitasking. This meant she would be overloaded in the coming weeks, especially with another significant task demanding her attention. Despite nearly succumbing to the curse, Hermione hadn't forgotten that the second task of the Triwizard Tournament was only 10 days away. It seemed like a convenient excuse. Her weakened state from the curse and the time-consuming treatment could justify a loss. But Hermione refused to make excuses. She was determined to give her best and hoped to perform well. The problem was, St. Mungo's was no library. At the sound of footsteps approaching, she was met with the sight of Atticus Blaine entering the room. His presence was commanding, yet there was a warmth in his eyes that put her at ease. "Professor Blaine," Hermione exclaimed, her voice a mix of surprise and relief. "I just read about your return in the Daily Prophet. It's wonderful to see you back." Atticus Blaine smiled, a gentle curve of his lips that seemed to light up the room. "Thank you, Hermione. It's good to be back at Hogwarts. I see you've been keeping busy." Hermione nodded, her earlier worries momentarily forgotten. "Yes, but I'm struggling with the task of finding a way to breathe underwater for an hour. The second task of the Triwizard Tournament is approaching fast." Atticus's expression turned thoughtful. "Ah, the second task. It's a challenging one. Indeed. Have you considered using gillyweed? It's a plant that allows you to breathe underwater." Hermione's eyes widened with realization. "Gillyweed. Of course. Why didn't I think of that? Thank you, Professor Blaine." "You're welcome," Atticus replied, his voice reassuring. "And remember, Hermione, sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective." As Hermione absorbed his advice, Tonks interjected with a playful grin. "See, Hermione, Atticus always has the answers. He's like a walking encyclopedia." Atticus chuckled softly. "I wouldn't go that far, Tonks, but I do try to help where I can." The room was filled with a sense of camaraderie, the earlier tension dissipating like mist in the morning sun. Hermione felt a renewed sense of determination, bolstered by the support of her friends and mentors. "Now, let's have dinner," Tonks suggested, gesturing to the lunchbox she had brought. "We can discuss more strategies over a good meal." As they settled down to eat, Hermione couldn't help but feel grateful for the people around her. With their guidance and her own perseverance, she was confident she could face any challenge that lay ahead. As Hermione turned to Tonks, ready to ask a question, a voice suddenly interrupted from the doorway of the ward. "Have you enjoyed your time off at St. Mungo's, Hermione?" Startled, both Hermione and Tonks looked towards the door and exclaimed in surprise at the sight of the smiling young man standing there. End of this chapter. Chapter 807. Apology. You arrived so quickly, Atticus. Tonks exclaimed with a hint of surprise after a warm smile. I thought you wouldn't be able to get away for a while. I never like wasting energy on things that don't interest me, Atticus Blaine replied with a smile. He approached the two of them, his gaze settling on Hermione, who was clad in hospital attire and watching him with a touch of emotion. After being bedridden for nearly half a month, the young witch appeared slightly thinner than before, but the flow of magic within her was completely normal. In fact, due to the numerous potions she had consumed to replenish her magic and the residual magic Atticus had left in her to suppress the curse, Hermione's magical power was now much stronger than before. It had essentially reached the level of an adult wizard. Good, Atticus nodded with satisfaction, offering a gentle smile. You've healed well. Professor Blaine's words brought a joyful smile to Hermione's face, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She knew without being told how hard Professor Blaine had worked to resolve her predicament. He had even dismantled a massive dark wizard organization that had been lurking in the European magical world for many years. Although this perception was somewhat exaggerated, to Hermione it was the reality she had witnessed. Professor, when can I return to Hogwarts? Hermione asked eagerly, her lips pursed in anticipation. In my opinion, you're ready now, Atticus replied, glancing at the desk in the ward with a chuckle. Just make sure to rest over the next few days. I believe you'll be fully recovered soon. Though she had been longing to leave the hospital, the news that she could return to school and reunite with her friends caught Hermione off guard. The overwhelming happiness filled her heart until Tonks congratulated her, bringing her back to reality. She noticed Professor Blaine picking up the Daily Prophet from the desk and scanning the headlines about him. Hermione opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. After reading a few reports, Atticus found that they were mostly accurate accounts of his statements from the morning press conference. The Daily Prophet had rarely embellished the facts. Setting the newspaper down, Atticus noticed Hermione's hesitation. After a moment of thought, he smiled and said, Are you wondering why I suppressed the news of your attack and distanced myself from the matter of dismantling this organization? Hermione bit her lip and nodded slightly. Tonks, too, was looking at Atticus, awaiting his explanation. The first question is straightforward. When you were initially attacked, we were unaware of the instigator's motives. We didn't know if the attack was driven by personal animosity towards you or if it was an attempt on your life. In such a situation, it was crucial to keep your location and condition confidential, rather than worrying about public accountability, Atticus explained, noting Hermione's understanding nod. As for the second question, it relates to the organization's intent behind their attack on you. Hermione listened intently, her eyes focused, but to her surprise, Professor Blaine continued, Regarding this, both Principal Dumbledore and I owe you an apology. This evil organization didn't simply aim to kill you. They intended to provoke Dumbledore and me by harming you, hoping to lure us into investigating and using us to achieve a certain purpose. What purpose? Hermione asked, her mind racing to piece together the puzzle. She realized that the organization's true targets were Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore, and she had been caught in the crossfire. Despite her curiosity, she knew she wouldn't receive an answer. Atticus Blaine chose not to announce the news to the public, and he likely wouldn't tell her either. As expected, Professor Blaine said apologetically, It's not suitable to announce this, Hermione. It would cause panic in the magical world. Everyone who has glimpsed part of the truth has been ordered to remain silent. I can assure you, is that this matter is resolved. Hermione was visibly curious about this purpose, but she refrained from asking further questions, knowing she was the affected victim. Instead, she nodded, looking at him with slightly uneasy eyes. Can I tell Harry and Ron what you've said? Oh, of course, Atticus smiled and nodded. Harry and Ron are both trustworthy. Are you planning to leave now? After keeping Hermione in the hospital for over 10 days, Tonks was feeling restless. The thought of returning to the thrilling life of battling dark forces filled her with excitement. Before reporting back to the ministry, she planned to visit Remus. Ever since Atticus took him to the alchemy workshop, Remus's previous leisurely life had vanished. He could only spend a quarter of the month in the country, and this happened to be one of those times. Remus was at the workshop for a few days, and Tonks didn't want to miss the opportunity to see him. She cheerfully said to Hermione, "I can help you pack, but there's really not much to pack, just a few books and some of your clothes." "Oh, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you or Sirius to take Hermione back to Hogwarts. I need to stay at St. Mungo's for a couple of days," Atticus said, noticing that Tonks seemed eager to leave. "You're staying at St. Mungo's?" Tonks was surprised. "What are you going to do?" There was no reason to hide it, so Atticus explained, "While tracking down this dark wizard organization, I found a muggle named Onisto Pastore who had been tortured by these wizards. This unfortunate muggle is in very poor health. If left untreated, he might not survive for long. I want to see if it's possible to alleviate his symptoms and help him regain consciousness." Hermione and Tonks exchanged glances and both exclaimed, "Is it the muggle that Kingsley sent, the one who was driven mad by the Cruciatus curse? Is there a possible cure, Professor Blaine?" Atticus raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You know about this?" "I ran into Kingsley when he came to St. Mungo's. I asked about the situation, but he didn't say much. He only mentioned that you discovered the muggle during your investigation." Sirius's voice came from outside the door, and Atticus turned to see Sirius entering with a tall, elderly lady carrying a red handbag. Sirius's face was beaming with a smile. He strode up to Atticus and gave his arm a hearty pat. "Well done, Atticus, for wiping out all the evil forces." Before Atticus could respond, Sirius added regretfully, "In such a fierce battle, you should have taken me along." "Ha, the Ministry has already expanded the Auror team. I heard Amelia is going to recommend you to lead the new team's actions. You won't lack exciting battles, Sirius," Atticus said with a smile, noticing something peculiar about the way the elderly lady accompanying Sirius looked at him. "Who is this?" Atticus asked. "I am Augusta Longbottom," Mrs. Longbottom introduced herself. Despite her tough demeanor, she seemed momentarily hesitant, even a bit dazed. "Are you sure you can cure that poor muggle?" End of this chapter. Chapter 808, The Torture of Waiting. As the pivotal day of the Triwizard Tournament approaches, the excitement surrounding it reignites across the Hogwarts campus. The buzz that filled the air before the first competition returns, with students eagerly discussing the potential outcomes of the second task. Cedric Diggory of Hufflepuff garners even more attention than before. This is hardly surprising. Although Cedric has always been celebrated as Hogwarts' true champion, the presence of Hermione Granger means Gryffindor students have a reason to rally behind their own. However, the dynamics have shifted. "Hey Harry, Ron, any news about Hermione?" Angelina Johnson, accompanied by Alicia Spinnet, Katie Bell, and other members of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, entered the Great Hall from the foyer. Spotting Harry and Ron at the far end of the Gryffindor table, surrounded by a group of boys who seemed unapproachable, the girls sighed in disappointment. Yet, Angelina asked with a glimmer of hope. "I've said it at least 1,000 times, Harry exclaimed, slamming his silver spoon onto his tray before turning around. "Professor McGonagall won't let us write to her, fearing it might disrupt Hermione's treatment. If you're so worried, why not take a leave and visit St. Mungo's yourself?" After his outburst, Harry turned to see who had asked the question. Realizing it was Angelina, a close comrade from the Quidditch team, he pursed his lips. Instead of apologizing, he resumed eating his breakfast with a sullen expression, eager to escape the noisy hall. Angelina, unfazed by Harry's outburst, simply sighed, shrugged, and continued past him with Katie and Alicia. "Look, Harry," Ron said, gesturing with his chin towards the Hufflepuff table. Cedric Diggory was watching them with a troubled expression. It was unclear whether Cedric had heard Harry's shouting or if he was simply concerned about the situation. "I promise you, Ron," Harry said coldly, glancing briefly at Cedric before looking away. "If he dares to come over and gloat, I'll make his nose look like Dumbledore's. I've wanted to do that for a long time." Neville Longbottom, sitting nearby, opened his mouth as if to speak but hesitated. Knowing Cedric, Neville doubted he would gloat over someone else's misfortune. Ultimately, he remained silent, inching away from Harry and Ron. Since Hermione's attack and subsequent transfer to St. Mungo's for treatment, Harry and Ron had been on edge. Neville often felt as though they blamed him for the incident. Last Friday night, Ron had insisted in the dormitory that either Cedric or Victor Krum, or perhaps both, were responsible for Hermione's predicament, as their competition results were now tied for first place. Harry had dismissed Ron's theory, suggesting instead that Fleur Delacour might have conspired with Cedric and Krum. "Think about it, Ron," Harry had exclaimed, pacing the warm dormitory and waving his arms. "Hermione and Fleur are the only girls among the champions, but Hermione's grades are first, and—" back slightly, clearing his throat awkwardly. "I thought he was just having a bit of fun, Professor McGonagall, but I'll keep a closer eye on things from now on." Professor McGonagall's stern gaze softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. "See that you do, Hagrid. We can't afford any more accidents, especially not now." Harry and Ron exchanged a glance, their earlier anger momentarily forgotten as they watched Neville, who was now being helped to his feet by Dean and Seamus. The class resumed its chaotic rhythm, with students cautiously keeping their distance from the blast-tailed snails. Hagrid turned back to Harry and Ron, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Listen, you two, I know it's hard, but you have to keep your heads down and focus on your studies. Hermione wouldn't want you getting into trouble on her account." Harry nodded reluctantly, his anger simmering just below the surface. "I know, Hagrid. It's hard not knowing." "I understand, Harry," Hagrid said gently. You have to trust that Atticus Blaine and Professor Dumbledore are doing everything they can. Hermione's strong, and she'll pull through this." Ron sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah, you're right. We just have to hang in there." As the class drew to a close, the students began to gather their things, casting wary glances at the snails. Hagrid gave Harry and Ron a reassuring pat on the back. "Remember, if you need to talk, I'm always here." With a final nod, Harry and Ron headed back towards the castle, their minds still heavy with worry, but bolstered by Hagrid's words. They knew they had to be patient and trust in their friends and mentors, even when the path ahead seemed uncertain. Atticus Blaine hung his head guiltily. I was planning on rescuing him. So, what do you want, Professor McGonagall?" "I'm looking for Potter and Weasley," Professor McGonagall replied, approaching and helping Neville, whose legs had gone weak, to stand. She cast a stern glance at the Slytherin students who were enjoying the spectacle. "Oh, Professor McGonagall, if you had been in the Great Hall this morning," Hagrid began, glancing at Harry and Ron, who looked both surprised and guilty. He sighed, ready to defend them. "Come on, Potter Weasley," Professor McGonagall said, a hint of impatience in her voice. "Professor Black is waiting for you two in Gryffindor Tower. He said he can't stay long and must return to St. Mungo's as soon as possible." "Serious?" Harry and Ron exchanged bewildered looks, confusion evident in their eyes. They knew he was at St. Mungo's, guarding Hermione to prevent any further attacks. Why had he suddenly come to Hogwarts? The thought filled them with dread rather than joy, fearing something bad had happened. "He's here to help Miss Granger get her textbooks," Professor McGonagall explained, noticing the pale faces of Harry and Ron. Her lips, which had been pursed in tension, softened into a smile. "Professor Black also brought news. Go quickly. I believe you'll be happy to hear the good news." End of this chapter. Chapter 809, Desperate Neville. "I've heard about this, Harry. Since Atticus Blaine left Hogwarts to find a way to save Hermione and catch the culprit behind the attack, the atmosphere in the physical training class had become noticeably more relaxed. Without Professor Blaine's presence, many of the more rigorous training sessions were put on hold. The students focused on honing their dodging skills and spell proficiency instead. In the training room, where the rhythmic pounding of practice echoed, Cedric approached Harry, holding a freshly printed copy of the Daily Prophet. Cedric had been cautious, avoiding any confrontation with Harry, who had been on edge lately, much like a hedgehog bristling with quills. "I heard that Professor Black has sent word that Hermione is out of danger, right?" Cedric inquired. "Wait, Neville, I'm talking to Cedric." Harry was in the midst of helping Neville master the disarming charm. Among all the students, Harry's proficiency with the spell was unmatched. He wiped the sweat from his brow, took a deep breath, and turned to Cedric, a smile breaking through his perspiration. Yes, Sirius did say that. Just days ago, a calm conversation with Cedric would have been unthinkable for Harry. However, the relief of Hermione's recovery had softened his anger, even towards Cedric, who had won Cho Chang's affections. Harry was willing to exchange a few words with him now. That's good. Did Professor Black mention when Hermione might return to Hogwarts? Cedric asked, visibly relieved that Harry wasn't glaring at him. He had heard whispers of Harry and Ron's extreme reactions during this period, though he hadn't paid them much mind. In such a tense atmosphere, it was wise to tread carefully. Reflecting on his own harsh words towards the other Triwizard champions, Harry felt a twinge of embarrassment. He pursed his lips, his green eyes avoiding Cedric's earnest gaze. The healers at St. Mungo's have thoroughly examined Hermione. Although they believe she's fully recovered and can return any time, both Sirius and the Ministry of Magic think it's best for her to stay there a couple more days. They'll wait for Professor Blaine to return from abroad and follow his guidance. Harry glanced at the Daily Prophet tucked under Cedric's arm, noticing the solemn image of Professor Blaine on the front page. It lifted his spirits slightly. Ah, this means... Cedric's voice brimmed with excitement as he unfolded the newspaper to reveal the photo of Professor Blaine. Hermione might return to Hogwarts soon, and Professor Blaine will be back as well? I think so, Harry replied, a hint of a smile on his lips. That's great, Harry, Cedric exclaimed, clenching his fists in excitement. Physical education without Professor Blaine felt incomplete. Then Cedric leaned closer to Harry, lowering his voice. If Hermione returns to Hogwarts, you'll know before I do. Could you pass on a message for me? Harry, slightly taken aback, watched Cedric glance around before speaking quickly. Tell Hermione I want to talk to her as soon as possible to repay her for the help she gave me before the first task. Time is running out. With that, Cedric smiled at Harry, who was still processing the request, and quickly walked away. Harry's gaze followed Cedric until he rejoined Cho Chang, at which point Harry averted his eyes as if jolted by an electric shock. As Cedric departed, Neville approached, exclaiming, he was asking when Hermione would be back. Harry, seeing Neville's hesitation, understood his friend's unspoken concerns. He shrugged and prepared to continue their practice. Atticus Blaine had asked Neville to pass along a message, but he hadn't mentioned that Cedric had requested it. Hermione had assisted Cedric during the first task, which puzzled Harry. Hermione had never shared this with him or Ron. Despite Cedric's intentions, his efforts were bound to fail. Due to the unexpected events of the first task, Hermione was particularly sensitive to the notion of help. She was determined to complete the second task, relying solely on her own abilities, rejecting any notion of repayment from Cedric. Besides, they already knew what awaited them in the second task. Do you want to keep practicing, Neville? Harry asked, trying to shake off his thoughts. I don't know if I should continue, Neville replied, glancing at his hands. He had lost weight, and his usually capable face now showed signs of distress and a hint of despair. I can't seem to get the hang of this. If this keeps up, I might be expelled from Hogwarts. Don't be ridiculous, Neville. Hogwarts won't expel you just because you can't master the disarming charm. Look at Crabbe and Goyle. They still can't make feathers fly, Harry encouraged. Yes, Neville said, rubbing his sore wrist dejectedly. I might be better than them, but what's the use? I'm holding the team back. Professor Blaine won't let me keep up with the practice pace. Neville's situation was truly disheartening. His dedication was evident to everyone, yet the results were always lacking. If only Hermione were here. She was much better at offering advice and encouragement. Watching Neville's despondency, Harry sighed. He couldn't abandon Neville, could he? Trusting his teammates completely was the first thing Professor Blaine had emphasized when they formed the team. Just as Harry was about to offer some words of encouragement, the door to the physical education classroom swung open, and Professor McGonagall appeared, looking slightly anxious. The room, which had been filled with chatter and the occasional spark, fell silent. Everyone, including Harry and Neville, turned to look at her in surprise. What could have happened? Since the course began, the professor had never interrupted a class like this. Was there an emergency? Oh, wonderful, Longbottom, you're here! Professor McGonagall exclaimed, drawing everyone's attention to Neville. "Come with me quickly, Longbottom. Professor Dumbledore is waiting for you in his office." In an instant, Neville's face turned pale, and his sturdy frame began to tremble. Did Hogwarts really think he wasn't good enough and decide to expel him? Even Harry couldn't help but entertain the thought. "I beg, Grandma fires," Neville stammered, looking desperate and tearful under the torchlight. "What are you talking about, Mr. Longbottom?" Professor McGonagall asked, frowning. "Professor!" Harry stepped forward, his voice firm. "Hogwarts can't expel Neville. He's not the worst." A snicker from behind made Harry glare at Draco, but Draco merely glanced at them without making any snide remarks. "Expulsion?" Professor McGonagall raised an eyebrow. "No one is expelling Longbottom Potter. Come along, Mr. Longbottom. Professor Dumbledore wants you to go to his office immediately. He's taking you to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries." "St. Mungo's?" Harry exclaimed, his voice rising. "Why is Professor Dumbledore taking Neville to St. Mungo's? Is something wrong?" Professor McGonagall pursed her lips, indicating she didn't have the answers. Harry glanced at Neville, his eyes filled with curiosity and concern. Neville, however, appeared even more distraught than when he mistakenly believed he had been expelled. His lips quivered, his complexion was as pale as a waterlogged corpse, yet his eyes were red and swollen. What happened? Harry began to ask, but before he could finish, Neville charged past him like a frenzied lion, colliding with Professor McGonagall and rushing away. End of this chapter. Chapter 810. Not a Miracle. In St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, the atmosphere is usually serene, with the lights dimmed on most floors by 9 p.m. to ensure a restful environment for patients. However, tonight is different. The Curse Damage Department on the 5th floor is ablaze with light, bustling with activity. Most of St. Mungo's esteemed therapists, renowned for their expertise in treating curse damage, have gathered here. These therapists, who are respected figures in the magical community, now stand in the corridor, their usual pride replaced by expressions of excitement and disbelief. They are eager to get closer to a particular ward, their curiosity piqued by an extraordinary event. Even the legendary therapists whose portraits adorn the walls are animated with interest. Despite their age and frailty, they jostle for a better view, eager to witness the unprecedented occurrence. "That's incredible, Albus!" exclaimed a witch with long silver curls, her cheeks flushed with excitement, as Dumbledore emerged from the fire with a noticeably calmer Neville. She appeared in the frame closest to them, her voice trembling with awe. "Completely recovered, not a trace of damage. I've never seen anything like it in the entire history of magical injury treatment. In my opinion, Sir Merlin should award him another first-class medal." Neville's body trembled with emotion, though Dumbledore couldn't discern the extent of his happiness. With an arm around Neville's shoulder, he gently guided him up the stairs. Dellis de Winter, following their steps, flitted from one picture frame to another along the wall. "What did Atticus say, Dellis?" Dumbledore inquired calmly. "Oh, he still refuses to reveal how he restored that muggle to normal." Dellis, an elderly witch, gasped in exasperation. "As I mentioned, he barred everyone from entering, spent the afternoon alone in the muggle's ward, and then, miraculously, the muggle regained his senses. Of course, he's still a bit disoriented, but that's to be expected. The Cruciatus curse should have caused irreversible damage, yet overall, he's recovered." "Muggle?" Neville asked, puzzled. "Isn't it about me?" Dumbledore glanced at Neville but chose not to answer directly. Instead, he continued, "Where is Atticus now? Is he still in the muggle's ward?" "Yes, he hasn't allowed anyone else in, but he's been chatting with the muggle as if they're old friends," Dellis replied, pushing past a therapist blocking her path in the picture frame. She followed Dumbledore closely, who moved with surprising agility for someone over a century old. "Neville!" A sudden shout of surprise startled Neville, causing him to shiver. He blinked and saw a girl in hospital attire rushing towards him down the corridor. Her curly hair flew wildly as she ran. "Oh, Professor Dumbledore, good evening," she greeted. "Good evening, Miss Granger," Dumbledore replied, his blue eyes twinkling. He studied Hermione for a few moments before smiling warmly. "I'm glad to see you've regained your energy. If you'd stayed here another week, Your friends at school might have stormed my office in protest and set my beard on fire." Hermione bit her lip, her smile tinged with emotion and embarrassment, clearly understanding Dumbledore's jest. "I believe you have a general understanding of the situation, Miss Granger, but Mr. Longbottom is still a bit confused. Perhaps, while reminiscing about old times, you can help him clarify his doubts," Hermione suggested. "What about you, Professor?" she asked Dumbledore. "Oh, Professor Blaine sent me a message. He wants to discuss the specific treatment plan for Mr. Longbottom's parents before proceeding. He mentioned he might need my assistance," Dumbledore replied with a smile. He then greeted the therapists who had approached him and was quickly surrounded by an excited crowd. "Come on, Neville. Let's head to my ward, and I can fill you in on what's happening," Hermione said cheerfully, tugging on Neville's sleeve. "Your mother gave me a piece of wrapper to give to you when I returned to school. I can hand it over now." As Hermione led Neville down the bustling corridor, she felt a resistance. Turning around, she saw Neville standing there, his cheeks flushed and turning a shade of purple, as if caught doing something wrong. "You know, my parents, Hermione," Neville began weakly, as though something was holding him back. "Come on, Neville," Hermione urged, noticing his embarrassment. She understood his worries and fears, feeling a pang in her heart. "I'll tell you what Professor Blaine has done. Everything will be fine." Guarding the entrance to the ward were Sirius and Tonks. Mrs. Longbottom was also present, but had to leave to care for her son and daughter-in-law. "Dumbledore," Sirius said, pressing his face against the small glass window on the door, trying to glimpse inside. Tonks tapped him on the shoulder, bringing him back to reality. Dumbledore raised his hand to stop Sirius from speaking further. Inside the room, Atticus Blaine seemed to sense their presence. He stood up, walked over, and turned the door handle. "Please wait a moment, everyone. I still need to ensure the patient's condition is stable," Atticus said gently to the therapists, who looked at him with hopeful eyes. He then welcomed Dumbledore inside. Observing the lively muggle propped up against a soft pillow, Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. It was only then that he realized Atticus wasn't joking. He had truly managed to heal a muggle whose mind had been shattered by the Cruciatus curse. "You have undoubtedly achieved another miracle, Atticus," Dumbledore remarked, his voice filled with admiration. "It's hard to say whether it's a miracle, Principal Dumbledore, but you know it's not that simple," Atticus replied in a low, quick voice. With a smile, he turned to the hospital bed. "Let me introduce you, Kit," Atticus said softly. "This is Mr. Albus Dumbledore, the director of this hospital. My achievements are thanks to his training. I heard I cured your ailment, so I came to see you and conduct a checkup." "What?" Kit exclaimed, clearly overwhelmed by the presence of such an important figure. He attempted to get out of bed in a fluster, but Dumbledore gently stopped him. "You should rest, Kit. May I call you that?" Dumbledore asked kindly. "Oh, of course, Mr. Dumbledore." Old Kit replied nervously, feeling slightly out of place in the presence of Dumbledore's unusual robes. The old man's unique aura, which seemed to surpass his own age, made Kit feel as if he were in the presence of a government dignitary visiting the orphanage. "I must thank you for nurturing Atticus, Mr. Dumbledore," Kit said, swallowing nervously but smiling. "He has become a highly skilled doctor with a promising future. If Felina knew, she would be thrilled." "His achievements are a result of his hard work, Kit," Dumbledore responded warmly, his blue eyes twinkling with a mysterious light. "All right, Kit, I'm going to give you a checkup. Please close your eyes and relax." Kit glanced over at Atticus Blaine, who nodded reassuringly. Feeling more at ease, Kit lay back and closed his eyes. At that moment, Dumbledore waved his sleeves, causing Kit to drift into a deep sleep. Atticus blurred the transparent glass on the door panel and soundproofed the room. The pleasant smile on Dumbledore's face faded, replaced by a serious expression as he turned to Atticus. "You erased all the memories of this muggle named Onisto Pastore, didn't you, Atticus?" End of this chapter. Chapter 811, Dumbledore's Breakthrough Experience. Two soft chairs emerged from the void. As Atticus Blaine settled into one, the wariness etched on his face became unmistakable. He gently massaged his temples, remaining silent. Meanwhile, as Atticus had delved into Onisto Pastore's spiritual realm, Dumbledore gently opened the eyelids of the sleeping muggle on the hospital bed. Removing his half-moon spectacles, his clear blue eyes shone as brightly as a blue moon rising over a river. Just as you said. About 10 minutes later, Dumbledore straightened up. He lowered his gaze in contemplation and slowly sat on another sofa beside the hospital bed. Atticus spoke up. I erased Onisto Pastore's memory, along with the malevolent thoughts and magic that had corrupted his mind. These elements were intertwined with his memories. This was the only way. Otherwise, his consciousness would soon collapse, and his body would be drained. It wasn't easy for me, as it involved soul-level powers. Fortunately, he was a muggle, making it less challenging to manipulate his soul. I implanted Kit's personality into him. In my memory, Kit was a cleaner at my orphanage who passed away the year I graduated from Hogwarts. In her final years, Kit wasn't very lucid and often forgot who she was. But you know, it's impossible to recreate every detail of a person's life, so this fabricated personality is incomplete. Perhaps due to fatigue, there was a hint of weakness in Atticus's voice, but Dumbledore remained silent, listening intently. Even after Atticus finished speaking, Dumbledore did not rush to respond. Let me see, Headmaster Dumbledore. Sensing that Dumbledore's silence was unusual, Atticus raised an eyebrow and smiled at him. You probably think that completely erasing a person's original memory is akin to killing them. Do you believe I shouldn't have restored this muggle's consciousness in this manner? Perhaps I'm more liberal than you think, Atticus. A smile finally graced Dumbledore's aged face as he looked at Atticus calmly. Your method did help this poor muggle extend his life and alleviate his suffering. I won't fault you for that, but I must admit, I am surprised. Dumbledore regarded Atticus with a curious expression, his silver beard and hair fluttering slightly. I didn't expect it. Even though you're often in my sight, Atticus, I hadn't realized your magical prowess had reached such a level. To strip away the dark magic infecting a soul's surface is no small feat. I can't guarantee I could do the same, even with a muggle soul. Oh, you're still so humble, Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus replied with a smile. That's not entirely modesty, Atticus, Dumbledore said. Your expertise in soul magic, the most profound branch of all magical disciplines, exceeds my expectations. Until now, the only magic I knew that directly affected the soul was the killing curse and horcruxes. There are no fewer than 20 ancient magical texts on this subject in your office, Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus countered. The killing curse and horcruxes are very specific to the soul, and it's impossible to draw parallels based on their principles. It's the blood curse. This ancient curse allows for the analysis of the soul's structure to some extent, and through studying it, I've managed to harness deeper soul power. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows in surprise. Despicable Urbo's blood curse? Atticus nodded slightly. Just like the night I returned to Hogwarts 2 years ago, I shared my views on dark magic with you. Even within dark magic, there are aspects worth studying and learning from. Your perspective is quite thought-provoking, Atticus, Dumbledore remarked, his smile softening. But since you've already harnessed the power of the soul, it suggests you've nearly glimpsed the barrier, correct? The mention of the barrier made Atticus Blaine's eyes light up with a rare earnestness, even a hint of pleading in his voice. When did you first encounter this barrier, Headmaster Dumbledore, and what transpired afterward? Oh, that's quite a tale, Dumbledore replied with a playful wink, clearly amused. It seemed that this particular aspect of magical knowledge intrigued Atticus deeply. After all, in the modern magical world, and even several centuries back, few had reached such a level of understanding. I don't possess the extraordinary magical talent you do, Atticus. To have achieved such profound mastery of magic at your age is remarkable. I first saw the barrier after I turned 40, and I lingered before it for many years before finally breaking through during that infamous duel. Atticus frowned slightly, piecing together the answer in his mind. Dumbledore observed him with an expression Atticus had never seen before. To perceive the barrier at your age, Atticus, suggests your natural soul strength far exceeds that of ordinary individuals. Atticus felt a sense of awe. This aligned with his own suspicions about the source of his unusual magical talent. The strength of the soul differed from mana levels. Initially, individual differences were minimal. However, his soul's capacity was evidently more generous than most, as he had entered this world with a double soul. You mentioned the strength of the soul, Headmaster Dumbledore. Is this the key to breaking the barrier? What exactly is this so-called barrier? Atticus inquired, choosing not to elaborate on his peculiar circumstances. I'm afraid I can only offer a rough explanation, Dumbledore replied. The inheritance of such knowledge has nearly vanished. You see, there is a profound connection between our soul and body. The soul resides within the body, serving as the fundamental force that animates it. Yet, the soul is fragile and relies on the body's protection. The so-called barrier is the body's safeguard for the soul. What do you mean? Atticus asked, frowning slightly. Breaking the barrier means severing the body's protection of the soul, allowing the soul to exist independently in the world, Dumbledore explained solemnly, but not as a ghostly remnant. Can you achieve this? Atticus was visibly taken aback. Only once, Dumbledore admitted, his smile tinged with complexity. That was when I crossed the barrier. It was an extraordinary experience, one that still amazes me. Though Atticus appeared surprised, Dumbledore couldn't help but feel a touch of pride. However, a hint of bitterness crept into his expression. That day, with the help of Newt and several friends, we thwarted Gellert's plan to control the International Federation of Wizards. You may have heard that Gellert and I were friends in our youth. To preserve our friendship, we even made a blood pact, vowing never to become enemies. The pact dissolved that day for reasons I still find mysterious. After Gellert fled, I returned to my home in Godric's Hollow. I had lingered before the barrier for a long time, and a mix of complex emotions helped me break through. The barrier shattered, and my soul separated from my body. Driven by an irresistible instinct, my consciousness seemed to float toward the stars. My soul felt as if it were... Atticus Blaine's heart skipped a beat. Looking for what? He asked. Dumbledore shook his head regretfully. I don't know, Atticus. It's not a secret, but I am uncertain about what this strong instinct is driving me to seek. However, I do know that the feeling of weakness in my soul is a constant reminder. If my soul does not return to my body soon, it will dissipate. Although my soul has managed to break free from the confines of my body, it hasn't been nourished by enough magical power. It lacks the strength to completely sever its ties with the physical form. End of this chapter. Chapter 812, The Cage. Unbelievable. Atticus Blaine murmured softly, his brow furrowed as he absorbed Dumbledore's tale. The notion of a soul leaving the body and acting independently was a concept that seemed almost too fantastical, even in the realm of magic. You mentioned this happened only once? Atticus inquired, recalling Dumbledore's earlier words. It's more than I can handle, Atticus, Dumbledore replied, closing his eyes as he revisited the fear he had felt on that distant summit years ago. After a moment, he opened his eyes, meeting Atticus's gaze with a solemn expression. We can't simply label that experience as fear. It was equally wondrous and extraordinary. The soul's separation from the body brought a sense of freedom that defies description. But this is precisely why I must caution you. When you eventually open that door, Atticus, don't become ensnared by that freedom. Your soul will have no anchor, and you won't truly escape the body's confines. You might become so enamored with that freedom that it leads to your demise. Atticus's expression shifted, reflecting his internal conflict. Dumbledore's words confirmed his suspicions about the jellyfish world. Thank you for the warning, Headmaster Dumbledore. I will be cautious, Atticus nodded solemnly. In the years that followed, I could indeed let my soul leave my body for brief periods, but I refrained from doing so. As I mentioned, I feared the temptation. It felt utterly unrestrained, without any limitations. Nothing could bind my freedom, Dumbledore explained. It wasn't until later, as my body began to age and my magical abilities waned, that I realized I had lost this ability. Dumbledore smiled candidly. Nothing can withstand the passage of time. Everything eventually fades. Of course, you are wiser than I, Atticus. You understand that death is not to be feared. It is merely the beginning of another grand adventure. Atticus nodded slightly, recognizing the truth in Dumbledore's words. Having died once, he understood better than most that death was not the end. With all due respect, Atticus began, narrowing his eyes as he scrutinized Dumbledore. His penetrating gaze seemed to pierce through the old wizard's exterior, reaching his very core. I see no signs of your magic power deteriorating, Headmaster Dumbledore. In my estimation, no wizard I've encountered, myself included, possesses magic as potent as yours. Ah, yes, I suppose that's true, Dumbledore replied, unfazed by Atticus's scrutiny. He regarded Atticus with admiration, his tone tinged with self-deprecation. But you must understand, Atticus, possessing such magic doesn't mean I can wield it fully. In contrast, you can harness the active magic stored within you. A sudden clarity struck Atticus, as if Dumbledore's words had dispelled the fog clouding his mind. His handsome features relaxed, and his eyebrows arched in realization. So that's it, Atticus murmured softly. Precisely, Dumbledore smiled. A significant portion of the magic within me is beyond my control. It has become intertwined with my very being. This does make me more vigorous than most my age, but I can no longer utilize it. What if? Atticus pondered aloud, his mind racing with possibilities. This was a rare opportunity. Dumbledore had willingly shared his insights. In the current landscape of magical scarcity, this was invaluable. What if you were to forcibly use the magic that lies dormant? I'm afraid I might need to draft a will before attempting that, Atticus Blaine remarked with a wry smile. Dumbledore chuckled softly. But as you might have guessed, Atticus, before I depart from this beautiful world, I wish to briefly experience the vitality of youth once more. Atticus pursed his lips, his breath catching momentarily. Perhaps the conversation he had with Vogel had reached Dumbledore's ears, but Atticus was too indifferent to be intimidated by the subtle warning in Dumbledore's words. His curiosity was piqued, and he asked, "Where is Voldemort, and how would you assess his strength?" "Clearly, Voldemort will never be able to witness the wonders you are about to see," Dumbledore replied. "It requires a complete and healthy soul, something Voldemort has irreparably damaged. It's uncertain if he can even maintain his sanity." This suggested that Hirebo likely developed magic akin to Horcruxes after becoming a legend. Hirebo undoubtedly created Horcruxes, which is why Merlin couldn't completely destroy him and instead chose to banish him. Atticus pondered this as Dumbledore continued in a solemn tone. "I must admit, Voldemort's mastery of dark magic surpasses ordinary imagination. While he may never reach the pinnacle, his malevolent transformation of his body grants him formidable abilities. Underestimating him would be a grave mistake." Dumbledore's cautionary words about Voldemort's dangers were familiar, almost cliched. Silence enveloped the ward, broken only by the slow, steady breathing of Pastora, who slept soundly. For an old man who had lost everything, perhaps only the loss of memory could grant him peaceful slumber. Atticus's gaze fell on the sleeping Muggle's face. Deciding what to do with him was a conundrum. Keeping him at St. Mungo's was inappropriate. The only option was to return him to the Muggle world. As far as Atticus knew, old Kit had no family left, having dedicated his life to the orphanage. Sending Pastore back there was out of the question. Perhaps a nursing home, with some gentle persuasion to forget old Kit's past, would allow him to spend his remaining years peacefully in a foreign land. After contemplating Onisto Pastore's future, Atticus turned to Dumbledore, who remained silent. For once, Atticus noticed a flicker of emotion in Dumbledore's clear blue eyes. With thoughts swirling, Atticus whispered, "I thought you might inquire about the situation." For a moment, Dumbledore seemed to age before Atticus's eyes, his beard losing its silver sheen. After a few labored breaths, Dumbledore shook his head, offering no explanation. "The living conditions there are quite poor," Atticus stated plainly, his expression neutral. It was bitterly cold, and the threadbare dressing gown he wore seemed to have been in use for at least 20 years. He could certainly use a pair of wool socks. His room was cluttered with newspapers, every issue of the Prophet available. It seemed to be his only pastime besides gazing at the scenery. When I pulled Vogel's useless grandson from his room, he was engrossed in the newspaper. Dumbledore's eyes rested on his weathered hands, silent but attentive to every word of Atticus's account. Atticus rose, walked to the shelf opposite the hospital bed, and slowly prepared tea, allowing Dumbledore time to process his emotions. "Do you think?" Dumbledore's voice was barely audible. "He realized his mistake?" Atticus inwardly shook his head at the question's naivety. "It seems to me, Headmaster Dumbledore, that he has not yet found peace." Atticus's words brought a glimmer of brightness back to the room. I'm sorry, it seems like there might be a misunderstanding. Could you please provide the text that needs improvement? Chapter 813. The letter under Atticus Blaine's intervention. Jasna Rosier, the Dark Witch, was imprisoned in Azkaban. He chose not to disclose her situation to Dumbledore, nor did he mention the gift left for Grindelwald. Truthfully, Atticus was uncertain whether Grindelwald would decipher the cryptic information he had shared or if he would indeed leave Nurmengard. He wasn't even sure if his actions were right. His decisions were driven by an underlying insecurity. The future was uncertain, and Atticus was acutely aware that he faced more than just Voldemort, who would eventually be defeated. Merlin and the four founders of Hogwarts had planned for him thousands of years in advance. Hirebo, who lurked outside the dark territory and coveted the light of this world, was no easy adversary. In this era, there were very few wizards he could rely on for help. Tell me about Neville's parents. Dumbledore's persistence surprised Atticus. By the time he returned to his seat with a teacup in hand, he had regained his composure, though his voice still carried a hint of hoarseness. You're considering treating them as you did this muggle, aren't you? Dumbledore frowned. But the issue is, Augusta and Neville may not accept Alice and Frank becoming different people. There are two challenges, Atticus replied, suppressing his own concerns as he traced the rim of his cup with his fingertips. As we discussed earlier, ethically speaking, erasing a person's entire memory is akin to erasing their personality, and the loss of personality can be equated to death. Neville's parents are in a better situation than this muggle. They are well cared for, and even if the problem isn't resolved, they can still live for several more years. Therefore, I can't decide whether to treat them or not. Dumbledore pondered this dilemma. And the second challenge? As you mentioned, Headmaster Dumbledore, I cannot turn Neville's parents into different people. So, after clearing their memories, my plan is to gather memories of the original Alice and Frank from everyone who knew them, Mrs. Longbottom, the professors, including you, who taught them at Hogwarts, and former members of the Order of the Phoenix. Atticus paused, then continued. Finally, compile these memories and reinstill them into Neville's parents to reconstruct their personalities. You will need to take the lead in this matter, Headmaster Dumbledore. Mrs. Longbottom doesn't know me well enough to trust me with something like this. Dumbledore finally grasped Atticus's concerns. This wasn't treatment, it was a recreation of Frank and Alice. The soul remained the same, and the body remained the same. However, completely erasing the original soul and reconstructing their character was a bold and imaginative approach. Yet, there was a possibility of success. After all, there was already an established precedent. The greatest challenge of this plan was, if it succeeded, how would the new Frank and Alice be perceived? Would they still be the same? For a moment, even Dumbledore was perplexed. I must say, Atticus, he began after a brief pause, shaking his head, this is an incredibly ingenious idea, and if we work together, the chances of success are high. But, Dumbledore looked at Atticus intently, neither of us has the right to make this decision. Only Augusta and Neville do. My suggestion is, Atticus interjected, shaking his head to interrupt Dumbledore's proposal, you can discuss it with Mrs. Longbottom, but there's no need to burden Neville Longbottom with this decision. The child's mind should not be subjected to any further tests, Dumbledore said, intertwining his slender fingers. He remained silent, as if under a petrification spell, deep in thought. Ultimately, he did not accept Atticus Blaine's suggestion. I agree with your perspective, Atticus, but neither you nor I have the authority to make this decision. Whether Mr. Longbottom needs to know the nature of his parents' treatment is a matter that requires Augusta's consultation. We can only offer advice. Atticus shook his head, frustrated by the recurring issue when working with Dumbledore. His opinions and suggestions were always so perfect and difficult to fault, yet they often felt idealistic and indecisive. Tap, tap, tap. An owl perched in a small window hole high on the outer wall of the ward, tapping quickly on the glass. Atticus glanced at it, his eyes narrowing. He left his seat, walked briskly to the window, and stood on tiptoe to let the owl in. Upon seeing the style of the envelope and the address on it, the atmosphere around him suddenly grew tense. What's wrong, Atticus? What happened? Dumbledore asked, noticing the change in Atticus's demeanor. He had been contemplating how to communicate with Augusta to gain her agreement on the treatment plan proposed by Atticus. Now he stood up, looking at Atticus with concern. Atticus did not answer immediately. Instead, he deftly opened the letter, scanning its contents quickly. The message was brief, and it took him only a few seconds to absorb it. He read it several times, his expression darkening, before finally sighing quietly. "I have to leave for a moment, Headmaster Dumbledore. As for Mrs. Longbottom's situation," Atticus began, "I will speak with Augusta. If she agrees to the plan, I will contact everyone familiar with Alice and Frank as soon as possible to gather their memories." Dumbledore looked at Atticus with gentle concern, sensing his unease after reading the letter. "If you need any help—" "Oh, it's not a big deal," Atticus replied, tucking the letter into his pocket with a smile. "If all goes well, I might be back by tomorrow morning." With a click, Atticus opened the ward door. The drowsy Sirius, who had been waiting outside, immediately perked up, looking at Atticus with anticipation. "How is it? Has the Muggle been confirmed to have recovered? Can the method you used on him be applied to Alice and Frank?" Sirius asked eagerly. The therapists in the corridor, still refusing to leave, crowded around Atticus, their excitement palpable. "Can you tell us how you did it, Mr. Blaine?" one of them asked. "It's a miracle, Mr. Blaine," another chimed in. "You've restored sanity to a Muggle who suffered a mental breakdown and was tortured by the Cruciatus curse. This is an unsolvable problem worldwide. Please share a few words, Mr. Blaine," someone else urged. "Tell us your thoughts and where your inspiration comes from." "Oh," Principal Delise Derwent, from the opposite wall, waved her arms enthusiastically. "Don't be stingy, Atticus. I want to know, too." "I'm sorry, everyone," Atticus said with a smile. "The treatment for the Muggle was just a bold experiment. Whether it can be extended to others still requires rigorous testing, and it's not convenient to disclose it at the moment." With that, under Dumbledore's worried gaze, Atticus gave a reassuring nod to the confused Sirius and Tonks before striding away. End of this chapter. Chapter 814, Comfort. Neville hesitated at the threshold of Hermione's private ward, a hint of reluctance in his demeanor. He lingered at the door, avoiding a direct glance inside. Meanwhile, Professor Dumbledore seemed to have completely forgotten about him, as if the purpose of bringing him here had slipped his mind. "Come on, Neville," Hermione called out, her spirits noticeably lifted. After all, Neville was the first classmate she had seen during her 2-week stay at St. Mungo's. She gestured for him to sit on the stool where Sirius usually sat and moved towards the wardrobe. She rummaged through the pockets of a robe hanging there, her voice urgent with curiosity. "Tell me, Neville, how is everyone at school? Did anything happen while I was away?" "Oh, it's not bad. Everything is normal at school," Neville replied, though he seemed a bit dazed and hesitant. "Everyone is very concerned about your condition, but Professor McGonagall didn't allow us to write to you. She said you needed to rest during your treatment." "Sirius also won't let me write letters to the school," Hermione said, a hint of dissatisfaction in her tone. "Harry and Ron must be worried about me, but Professor Snape refuses to send a message to them for me. Sirius believes that whoever cursed me might intercept any owls flying to Hogwarts to see if I'm still alive. If they truly wanted me dead, they might try again. I don't deny the possibility, but the odds are low. There are so many owls flying to Hogwarts every day, they can't possibly intercept them all. Still, it's a special time, so caution isn't a bad thing." "Ah, found it." Neville watched Hermione with a mix of respect and awe. She seemed to be holding her nerves in check, her tone light and carefree, something he couldn't imagine doing if he knew someone was out to harm him. "Sorry, Neville, it's a bit wrinkled," Hermione said, smoothing out the wrapper of a piece of bubble gum before handing it to him with an apologetic smile. Neville's face turned a shade of purple, his lips pressed tightly together, and he avoided Hermione's gaze, fighting the urge to flee. Yet he accepted the crumpled wrapper and tucked it carefully into his pocket. "It's okay," Neville whispered. "I already have plenty." "Do you want to talk, Neville?" Hermione asked gently, noticing how he sat curled up, as if bracing for ridicule. She brushed the hair from her eyes and perched on the edge of her hospital bed, her voice soft. What did Professor Dumbledore say to you on the way? Neville's body trembled slightly. He lowered his head and murmured, "He told me that Professor Blaine sent a message saying he was certain my parents could wake up. He said that if they could return to normal, they would definitely want to see me first." Hermione looked at Neville with sympathy. She understood why he wasn't overjoyed. It wasn't that he didn't want his parents to recover. He feared Professor Blaine might fail. Mrs. Longbottom was a kind woman, often visiting Hermione's ward to chat. Hermione knew how much effort the entire family had invested over the years to restore Neville's parents' sanity. When the tragedy struck years ago, Dumbledore had rushed to Neville's parents as soon as he received the news. Unfortunately, even a wizard of Dumbledore's caliber couldn't heal their injuries. In an effort to quell public outrage, the Ministry of Magic had spared no. Efforts were made to invite internationally renowned magical injury therapists for consultations. While these therapists offered valuable suggestions on how to care for Neville's parents, they were ultimately at a loss when it came to treating them. Mrs. Longbottom recounted how, in the beginning, they never gave up hope. Every member of the Longbottom family did their utmost to help Frank and Alice. From a young age, Neville witnessed a parade of esteemed individuals visiting his parents' ward, employing various methods to restore their sanity. Yet in the end, each left with a heavy heart. "You should trust Professor Blaine, Neville. He is a man capable of forming miracles," Hermione said with conviction. "I still remember the day I was cursed. On the way to Hogwarts, he assured me that I would soon be well again." Hermione's breath quickened momentarily, her eyes flickering with emotion. And he did it. Not only that, but he also dismantled an evil dark wizard organization. After taking a few deep breaths to steady herself, Hermione continued, "Since Professor Blaine assured Professor Dumbledore of his confidence, I believe there's a strong chance your parents will recover." "Neville, you might not be aware, but earlier today, Professor Blaine visited a Muggle ward. A dark wizard from a group he had previously destroyed had used the Cruciatus Curse to torment Muggles, leaving them insane. The situation was similar to your parents." Before Professor Blaine's arrival, the therapists at St. Mungo's had diagnosed the Muggle as beyond hope, believing he was on the brink of death. "But you see," Hermione said, smiling encouragingly at Neville, who seemed slightly uplifted, "in just one afternoon, that Muggle has already shown remarkable improvement. You should have seen how astonished those professional healers were when they heard about it." Neville listened intently, his breathing quickening unconsciously, though his eyes still held a trace of confusion. Could his parents truly be cured? Could he finally have a happy family? Professor Blaine had performed countless miracles in the 2 years since he emerged as a prominent figure. He was one of the most extraordinary wizards Neville had ever encountered. Beyond his unparalleled magical prowess, Professor Blaine treated everyone with fairness. He never criticized Neville for his clumsiness in physical education classes and showed no favoritism towards students from any particular house. This quality, though expected of a professor, stood out starkly when compared to another professor from Slytherin. But Professor Blaine mentioned that he hasn't conducted in-depth research on healing soul damage caused by the Cruciatus Curse. "It's a complex issue that could take months to resolve," Neville said, gritting his teeth, trying to convince himself to remain hopeful. After all, there was a glimmer of hope that his parents could be cured. Yet his mind was plagued with worries about potential disappointment. What if Professor Blaine couldn't succeed? The last shred of hope in his heart would be shattered, and the situation might become even more dire, perhaps irreversible. Hermione understood Neville's concerns. She recalled how, at the beginning of the last semester, when Professor Blaine was reviewing Professor Moody's class, Neville had inquired about the treatment for the Cruciatus Curse. At that time, Professor Blaine's response had been unexpectedly discouraging. In just a few months, how many challenges that therapists had struggled with for centuries had been overcome? To be honest, Hermione found it incredible. However, Professor Atticus Blaine was different from Gilderoy Lockhart, whom she had once mistakenly admired. He would never mock Neville's parents, and neither would Professor Dumbledore. Hermione calmly shared her analysis, and with her patient encouragement, Neville finally seemed less troubled. Spending Christmas with his family by the fireplace, was this once unattainable dream really possible? The conversation gradually shifted, and when Neville revealed to Hermione that during the time she was out of contact, Harry and Ron had suspected nearly everyone at school of being her murderer, and had even received several detentions for being distracted in class, Hermione's pure brown eyes sparkled. She covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Those two fools!" "In my opinion," Dumbledore's voice suddenly came from the doorway. He looked at Hermione, who was inexplicably moved with a smile on his face and bright eyes. "Mr. Potter and Mr. Weasley clearly value your friendship very much." Hermione gasped, quickly wiped her eyes, and stood up from the bed. "Grandmother?" Neville also stood up quickly. He first glanced at Professor Dumbledore, then at his grandmother, and called out nervously. Mrs. Longbottom's expression was complex. She looked at her grandson, not immediately inquiring about his school performance as she usually did. Instead, her face showed a mix of distress and guilt, emotions that made Neville increasingly uneasy. What had happened? What had Professor Dumbledore said to his grandmother? Was Professor Blaine's treatment plan not feasible? Neville clenched his fists tightly, his cheeks turning pale. "Neville," Mrs. Longbottom, who now appeared somewhat frail, spoke in a hoarse voice, abandoning her usual stern tone. "Do you want your parents to return to normal?" End of this chapter. Chapter 815, Lawrence on the Verge of Death. "Do you want your parents to get back to normal?" Mrs. Longbottom's question hung in the air, leaving Hermione frowning in confusion. It seemed absurd to think that Neville wouldn't want his parents to be healthy. Instinctively, Hermione glanced at Professor Dumbledore, hoping for some guidance, yet he stood there silently, hands folded, offering no clues. Hermione realized she had to rely on her own judgment. It was clear that Professor Dumbledore had discussed Professor Blaine's treatment plan with Mrs. Longbottom in detail. The plan must hold promise, otherwise Mrs. Longbottom wouldn't have posed such a question. But there was a catch, risk. Yes, that was the crux of it. Hermione pursed her lips, casting a worried glance at Neville. It was only natural that treating such a complex and widespread ailment would involve some danger. Having spent time with Mrs. Longbottom, Hermione knew her to be a determined and formidable witch. The risk that made her hesitate and silence Dumbledore was likely not trivial. Neville stared at his grandmother, a sudden clarity dawning on him. Like Hermione, he understood the essence of her peculiar question. Instinctively, he wanted to refuse. If they pursued treatment, his parents might face unpredictable dangers. The threat must be significant. Otherwise, his grandmother and Professor Dumbledore wouldn't have hesitated, even with successful precedents. Without treatment, at least he would still have his parents, albeit in their current state, or so Neville thought. Yet as he looked at his grandmother, who seemed to age before his eyes, he found himself unable to voice his thoughts. She had always told him that his parents were heroes, having fought against evil, and that he should be proud of their bravery. But the pain in her heart must mirror his own, perhaps even more intensely. The image of his parents lying in their hospital beds flashed before Neville's eyes. Each visit reminded him of time's relentless march, as their bodies withered and nightmares tormented them, aging them visibly. Was this existence, lingering until death, truly what they desired? Neville's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. If it were him, he wouldn't want to live like that. He'd prefer a swift end. He couldn't let his own fear rob them of a chance at recovery. "I want them to be healthy again," Neville declared, his voice steadying as he met his grandmother's weathered gaze, his resolve as firm as a warrior's. Meanwhile, in Westminster, Mayfair, life unfolded unpredictably. In a serene park, beside a pristine road, Atticus Blaine stood beneath a towering ash tree, its branches meticulously pruned. His eyes were fixed on the road's end, where a grand building loomed, its pure white marble walls adorned with golden reliefs. It rivaled the opulence of the Malfoy family's renowned manor. Atticus had thought he'd never return here after his last visit with Harry. Yet, a letter had summoned him back. Though penned by someone from the estate, it hadn't been sent from this address. Since graduating from Hogwarts, Atticus had embarked on a journey to travel around the country, ensuring the orphanage wouldn't be left unattended. his eyes revealing a glimmer of recognition and surprise. "Atticus Blaine," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with emotion. "You've come." Atticus nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Of course, Lawrence. I couldn't ignore your letter. You've always been more than just a butler to the Blaine family." Lawrence attempted a weak smile, his eyes softening. "I feared you might not come, given the circumstances." Atticus pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, his gaze steady and reassuring. "I would never ignore a call from you, Lawrence. You've been the backbone of this family for as long as I can remember." The old butler's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you, Atticus. It means a great deal to me." Atticus glanced around the room, taking in the modest surroundings. Despite the grandeur of Blaine Manor, Lawrence had chosen to remain in the butler's quarters, a testament to his humility and dedication. "You've kept the manor in remarkable condition," Atticus observed, his voice filled with admiration. Lawrence chuckled softly, though it quickly turned into a cough. "It's not what it used to be, but I do my best. The manor holds many memories, and I couldn't bear to see it fall into disrepair." Atticus reached out, placing a comforting hand on Lawrence's frail arm. "You've done more than enough, Lawrence. The manor stands as a testament to your loyalty and care." Lawrence's eyes closed briefly, a sigh escaping his lips. "I just wanted to see you one last time, to ensure you knew how much you meant to this family." Atticus's expression softened, his voice gentle. "And you, Lawrence, have been a guiding light for us all. Your dedication and integrity have left an indelible mark on the Blaine legacy." The room fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of unspoken gratitude and respect hanging in the air. Atticus remained by Lawrence's side, offering silent companionship to the man who had been a steadfast presence throughout his life. As the dim light from the bedside lamp cast a warm glow over the room, Atticus knew that this visit was not just a farewell, but a celebration of a life well lived and a bond that transcended the boundaries of duty and blood. In the dim light, Atticus Blaine's eyes focused on a face he knew all too well. A surge of recognition jolted him from his lethargy, and he sat up abruptly, exclaiming in astonishment, "Master Blaine!" End of this chapter. Chapter 816, Unraveling Master Blaine. Lawrence, who had been lying exhausted on the hospital bed, suddenly sat up with a groan, his eyes wide with surprise as he stared at Atticus Blaine. The old housekeeper thought he was hallucinating. He rubbed his eyes vigorously and peered closely at the young man standing beside the bed, illuminated by the dim light of the desk lamp. "It's really you, Master Blaine," Lawrence exclaimed, attempting to rise from the bed. However, Atticus gently pressed him back down, covering him with the quilt once more. "Since you're unwell, you should rest, Lawrence," Atticus said calmly. "And there's no need to call me Master Blaine. Just call me Atticus." "But that's so informal, Mr. Blaine," Lawrence blurted out. Yet, when his eyes met the young man's indifferent yet commanding face in the shadows, Lawrence's heart trembled, and he fell silent. It dawned on him that Atticus Blaine was not as simple as he had assumed. Having served the Blaine family for 2 generations, Lawrence had spent most of his life amidst London's upper-class society. He never considered himself a significant figure, but he prided himself on his keen perception. The grace and authority Atticus exuded were unmistakable. A person of true stature remains so, even when approachable. The confidence and power they naturally project cannot be mimicked by ordinary individuals. Yet, when Lawrence had investigated the name Atticus Blaine, he found no trace of a young hero by that name in any field. "As you wish, Atticus," Lawrence conceded, unable to resist Atticus's calm gaze, and remained in bed. Despite the soft pillow supporting him, Lawrence sat with his back straight, feeling slightly uneasy. The face beside the hospital bed, with its handsome, deep features, was almost identical to Mr. Blaine's. Lawrence was accustomed to maintaining a respectful posture in the presence of this face, which had become instinctual. Now, sitting on the bed while Atticus stood beside him felt strange. Atticus ignored Lawrence's unease. Seeing that Lawrence was willing to stay in bed, he released his grip on his shoulder. He glanced around the simple room, which seemed out of place in the luxurious manor, noting the absence of even a stool. "Oh, I should call Sank," Lawrence suggested. "No need," Atticus replied, waving his hand to stop Lawrence from summoning anyone. However, standing while conversing was inconvenient, so Atticus placed the lamp on the bedside table, tidied the scattered pillboxes, and pulled out the bedside table to use as a makeshift stool. Seated, Atticus looked at Lawrence, who was still watching him uneasily, and asked calmly, "What's wrong with your health?" "It was just a bit of rain," Lawrence hesitated before whispering. "As I age, my body isn't what it used to be." A muggle's lies are easily seen through by the leading magician in the wizarding world. However, when interacting with others, one must learn to tolerate their falsehoods. Atticus did not expose Lawrence's lie, but simply nodded. He then turned to gaze out the window at the serene manor, remaining silent. The clear moonlight bathed the lush grass in front of the villa, and the crisscrossing cobblestone paths shimmered under its glow. This tranquil night scene softened the manor's decay. "You've taken good care of this place, Lawrence," Atticus remarked with a smile. "It is my duty," Lawrence replied, following Atticus's gaze to the manor where he had worked and lived for most of his life. Every inch of this land bore his footprints and sweat. "It was," Atticus acknowledged, punctuating the point with a gentle nod. In a rather cold tone, Atticus Blaine said, "If it's only a burden to you now, Lawrence, then I have a sound suggestion. Let it go. No matter how much effort you've invested, it no longer holds value. At your age, you must understand that no matter how much you long for the past, you can't reclaim it." Lawrence opened his mouth, but an indescribable emotion caught in his throat, rendering him speechless. He wanted to ask the tall, young man beside him if he truly harbored such resentment towards the manor and its former owner, but he felt the question was futile. "I want to apologize to you, Atticus Blaine," Lawrence said, lowering his head apologetically. "I went to that orphanage to make a donation without your permission." "This isn't what I wanted to see happen, Lawrence," Atticus replied calmly. "But I won't blame you. After all, you did help the children at the Haas orphanage. Moreover, donating is your choice, and I have no right to restrict your actions." Lawrence remained silent, a sense of despondency filling his heart. After their brief exchange, he realized he could not persuade Master Blaine to return to the manor. The energy drained from him, leaving him looking weary once more. Memories of his life at the manor spun through his mind like a revolving door. He had arrived as a young boy, studied, and grown up there. Even his wife had brought honor to the Blaine name. The first family had introduced him, and the young master's father, who had died of illness, had written a letter of introduction to ensure his child received an excellent education. The Blaine family had been kind to him, but after the passing of the benevolent old masters, there was no heir. At this moment, Lawrence felt a twinge of resentment towards Bernadette. Objectively speaking, she had undoubtedly disrupted Master Blaine's life, leaving him disheartened and reluctant to form close relationships with women. She had also failed in her role as a mother. Otherwise, Master Blaine would not have grown up in an orphanage. Observing the old butler, who frowned in silence, Atticus sighed inwardly. He knew Lawrence was troubled. Atticus felt little attachment to the so-called Blaine family from which he came, but he held a good impression of the old butler, who was a kind-hearted man. In the past, when Bernadette had taken him, newly reincarnated into this world, to the manor, they had been turned away by an angry man. Lawrence, unable to bear it, had secretly tried to help with some money, but the despairing woman had refused. "What are you worried about?" Atticus asked calmly, breaking the silence. "Or did you call me here because you wanted me to do something?" Lawrence hesitated, unsure. "I hope you can return to the manor and inherit the Blaine family." "In your mind, is this old house the Blaine family, Lawrence?" Atticus asked, leaving Lawrence stunned and confused. "What is my name?" Atticus continued patiently. "Your name." Lawrence's lips quivered. "Atticus Blaine, but I don't understand, Master." "Now that you know," Atticus smiled, "I have not abandoned this name or this surname, so what do you have to worry about? Could it be that, in your heart, the Blaine family is this house? Would you only be satisfied if I returned to it? What represents a family's survival is not wealth, but people. As long as Atticus is still there, the Blaine family will endure. This is determined by the blood flowing in his veins and will not be changed by his will." The room fell silent, save for the sound of heavy breathing. In the darkness, Lawrence's eyes shone brighter. End of this chapter. Chapter 817, Trouble. You are right, Lawrence's voice was hoarse, his gray temples glistening with sweat, and his cheeks flushed as if recovering from a serious illness. Indeed, this was the case. Yet, Lawrence's eyes shone brighter, the aura of decadence from his ideological transformation now gone. At his age, he surprisingly exuded a hint of vitality. You're right, Atticus, Lawrence repeated, gazing deeply at Atticus Blaine as if observing a treasure. The important thing is the person. Atticus smiled warmly, breathing a sigh of relief as he stood up from the bedside table. I'm glad you realized that, Lawrence. So, he said gently, looking at the old housekeeper, have a good rest. I'm leaving. If you ever want to talk to me again, you can find me at the Haas orphanage during the Christmas holidays. Generally, I'm there during that time. Excitement flickered in Lawrence's gray eyes. Although there were only a few holidays each year, Master Blaine allowing him to visit the orphanage was already a generous offer. However, amidst his excitement, he recalled what Master Blaine had just said and was surprised once more. You're leaving? Lawrence exclaimed, glancing out the window. Since Mr. Blaine's passing and the subsequent sale and donation of the family assets, all the streetlights and yard lighting had been turned off after midnight to save money. Now, the outside was enveloped in deep night, with only the path of the manor visible, flanked by neatly arranged dim lights. Stay here for the night, Atticus, and leave tomorrow, Lawrence urged, getting off the hospital bed and taking Atticus's wrist with sincerity. Seeing Lawrence's pleading eyes, Atticus pondered. At St. Mungo's, Dumbledore was handling negotiations with Mrs. Longbottom. If she didn't agree, it wouldn't concern him. If she did, Dumbledore would need time to collect and organize the memories associated with Frank and Alice, which didn't require his immediate intervention. All right, Atticus nodded amid Lawrence's hopeful gaze. The day's task of implanting memories and reshaping Muggle personalities had been as exhausting as a fierce battle. He truly needed a good rest before the decisive encounter. I'll prepare your room, Lawrence exclaimed joyfully, quickly grabbing clothes from the hanger and rushing out. His sudden energy left Atticus unable to stop him. I'm not picky about where I sleep, Lawrence. Any room will do, Atticus called after him, a hint of tenderness in his eyes. Half an hour later, Lawrence led Atticus to the manor's most luxurious bedroom. After ushering him inside, he closed the door and left quickly, fearing Atticus might refuse. Oh, right. Lawrence remembered something after leaving the room, but when he turned back and saw the closed door, he hesitated and decided not to return. To be honest, Atticus didn't sleep well that night. Accustomed to his camp bed at Hogwarts, the sudden change to a luxurious, soft bed was unsettling. Moreover, on the shelf in the study connected to the bedroom, there were rows of photos of faces eerily similar to his, ranging from youthful to weathered, which felt somewhat disconcerting. So the next morning, as the first light of dawn broke and birds chirped, Atticus was already up, ready to pack and leave. But when he glanced at the door, he felt a sense of helplessness. Opening it, he found a young man waiting respectfully behind it. I'm Sank, Mr. Blaine. The young man bowed respectfully. Mr. Lawrence asked me to inquire whether you would prefer to dine in the study or the dining room. Let's head to the dining room, Atticus Blaine replied. Following Sank through the labyrinthine corridors of the villa, Atticus arrived at a small hall on the top floor after a 5-minute walk. The room was flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking view of the rising sun. The decor suggested that this was a private breakfast room, reserved exclusively for the manor's owner. The dining table, draped in a luxurious velvet tablecloth, was adorned with exquisite meals, freshest bouquets, and fine tableware. In the adjacent kitchen, Lawrence, the old butler, was busy directing the 2 remaining chefs. Understanding that Atticus wouldn't be staying long, Lawrence had sent someone to procure fresh ingredients before dawn, determined to provide a sumptuous breakfast. This was the old butler's heartfelt gesture, and Atticus accepted it graciously. He stood by the glass curtain wall, quietly taking in the morning scenery. When Lawrence wheeled the dining cart into the small dining room, he found Atticus standing there, hands clasped behind his back, lost in thought, his eyes slightly reddened. You seem to be recovering well, Lawrence, Atticus remarked with a smile, turning to face the old butler. This is the good fortune you've brought me, Lawrence replied, his voice tinged with emotion. At Atticus's invitation, Lawrence joined him at the table for breakfast. However, Atticus found it odd when he suggested that Sank and the chefs join them. Lawrence insisted they leave, and throughout the meal, he seemed hesitant to speak. "I plan to transform the manor into a welfare school, Atticus. What do you think?" Lawrence finally asked, revealing the source of his anxiety. The fog in Atticus's mind cleared, understanding Lawrence's concern. "I have no objections, Lawrence. You can proceed as you see fit," Atticus replied gently. However, he added a word of caution. "I'm afraid this endeavor might face some challenges. The local residents are influential, and they may not support converting Blaine Manor into a school. Additionally, the project will likely require substantial funding. There are still valuable antiques and furnishings in the villa. Auctioning them should cover the renovation costs. As for the neighbors, you're right, there might be objections, but I have a plan to ensure it won't disrupt their lives," Lawrence assured, having already considered these issues. His primary concern was Atticus's approval. Relieved by Atticus's lack of opposition, Lawrence relaxed, though a hint of hesitation lingered in his eyes. Transforming the manor into a school was no simple task, but Atticus had no intention of intervening. He trusted Lawrence's judgment. "Atticus," Lawrence began after a long pause, setting down his utensils and quickly moving to the door. He glanced around to ensure no one was eavesdropping, then closed the door firmly. Atticus watched this with a raised eyebrow, intrigued by Lawrence's behavior. Returning to the table, Lawrence took several deep breaths, his eyes betraying panic and a hint of fear. "Interesting," Atticus mused. What could have frightened Lawrence so? He realized that Lawrence's urgency to see him might not solely be about accepting the manor as the heir to the Blaine family. There was something more. "Do you remember the little boy who accompanied you the last time you visited the manor?" Lawrence asked, seemingly summoning the courage to continue. Summoning his courage, Lawrence fixed his gaze on Atticus Blaine's face, lowered his voice, and said, "That's it. Oh, I seem to recall he has a scar on his forehead. He's Vernon Dursley's nephew." Atticus set down his silver fork, leaned back in his chair, and interlaced his fingers, a smile of intrigue playing on his lips. "Harry Potter? Yes, that's the name," Lawrence confirmed, holding his breath and adopting a serious demeanor. "You mentioned once that you taught this child some self-defense skills. Are you still in contact with him? Is he in any kind of trouble?" End of this chapter. Chapter 818, The Crime of the Three Little Ones. In an instant, a flurry of thoughts raced through Atticus Blaine's mind. Yet, none of them could adequately explain the surprise and suspicion etched on the faces of Harry and Lawrence at that moment. Since the beginning of the semester, Harry had been keeping a low profile at Hogwarts. There had been no reports of trouble involving him, and he hadn't returned to his aunt and uncle's house. What could possibly make Lawrence recall this fleeting acquaintance with Harry? Or, more concerning, had Harry found himself in some sort of trouble? Atticus maintained a calm exterior, though he was on high alert internally. "What's the matter, Lawrence? Why did you suddenly bring up Potter?" Atticus asked, feigning just the right amount of surprise and confusion. Lawrence's breathing quickened, and his face flushed as if he were wrestling with an internal conflict. He hesitated, unsure whether he should confide in Master Blaine. The events of that day were utterly baffling, yet Lawrence sensed a conspiracy lurking beneath the surface. If he shared his suspicions with the young master, would it entangle him in a dangerous web? The abilities of those involved were formidable, but if the conspiracy was aimed at Master Blaine, Harry Potter, the young master's student, had delivered items to the orphanage. He was familiar with the Haas orphanage and clearly held the young master's trust. Those items had been stolen by two individuals with seemingly godlike powers and used to murder a postman. Lawrence had been mulling over these events repeatedly. No matter how he looked at it, the situation seemed inextricably linked to the young master. Suddenly, a realization struck Lawrence. He was overwhelmed with the joy that the young master had indeed come because of the letter, and he recalled something peculiar. How had the young master reached his room the previous night without alerting anyone? The manor's security, though not as robust as before, still posed a challenge for an untrained individual to infiltrate unnoticed. But if the young master possessed abilities akin to those of the two assassins, entering the manor would be a trivial task. As Lawrence pondered further, the situation seemed increasingly suspicious. He had investigated the young master, yet aside from the orphanage, there was no trace of Atticus Blaine's activities in society. No educational background, no employment history, no credit card transactions, no property records. It was as if the young master were a ghost. Lawrence? Atticus narrowed his eyes, his keen mental acuity picking up on the vague thoughts swirling in Lawrence's mind. Startled by the voice, Lawrence instinctively took 2 steps back, distancing himself from Atticus. "What's going on?" Atticus's expression softened, returning to a gentle and calm demeanor. "From your expression and eyes, it's as if you suspect I'm a criminal who's done something wrong again?" Lawrence gazed deeply at the face of the man seated at the dining table, his own expression a mix of complexity and uncertainty. His lips were dry as he spoke. "Master!" Lawrence's voice was hoarse, and this time, Atticus did not correct his form of address, instead adopting a listening posture. "Take a look at this first," Lawrence said, reaching into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and retrieving a newspaper. Atticus glanced at it. The newspaper, folded into squares, was worn and creased, the text faded and blurred from repeated readings. It was the Daily Mail. Lawrence unfolded the newspaper, skillfully flipping past the front and second pages. When he reached the 3rd page, he folded it several times to highlight the news he wanted Atticus to see. In a photograph, a middle-aged man wearing a Muggle post office uniform lay collapsed. In the rain, a bicycle lay on the ground with scattered packages beside it. Orphanage? Atticus Blaine immediately recognized the street in the photo as the one where the Haas orphanage was located. Lawrence nodded. "This happened on the day I attended the donation ceremony at Haas Orphanage." Atticus scanned the newspaper text. Decant Bosi was a post office delivery boy. His body was discovered on Flink Street a few days ago. At the time of the incident, Decant was performing his daily delivery duties. Upon receiving the report, the police cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough investigation. According to the police interviewed by our reporter, it was raining heavily at the time, which washed away any evidence. During the autopsy of Decant Bosi, the medical examiner found no signs of physical assault, but they did discover a significant amount of unmelted chocolate lodged in Mr. Bosi's throat. From this, they inferred that Decant Bosi might have accidentally swallowed an entire chocolate bar, choking on it and tragically losing his life. However, according to Decant Bosi's wife, it was a murder disguised as an accident because her husband disliked chocolate. The case is still under investigation, and our reporter will provide updates as they become available. Chocolate. Choking in the throat? Atticus stared intently at the photo in the newspaper, noting the slightly frightened expression on the face, and remained silent for a long time. "What did you see?" he asked calmly after a while. Lawrence's body trembled slightly. With just this question, he concluded that the young master was indeed involved in this matter, as he had suspected. Moreover, he likely had connections with 2 individuals possessing similar extraordinary abilities. Could such a group of people truly exist in this world? To preserve his shattered worldview, Lawrence had tried his best to avoid recalling and delving into the incident after witnessing it, but now he had no choice but to confront the issue directly. "The postman did choke to death on chocolate," Lawrence said with difficulty. "I saw it, the chocolate frog. It looked alive in an express box." "Chocolate frog?" Atticus's eyebrows furrowed. "Is it from Harry Potter?" The sender on the box indicated 2 more express deliveries from the same address. The senders were Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley. Foolish. At this moment, even Atticus lamented inwardly. This wasn't the usual mischief of these 3 breaking school rules by sending magical snacks from the wizarding world to Muggles. If the Ministry of Magic discovered this, they would undoubtedly have grounds to prosecute them and expel them from Hogwarts. But worse still, what they sent had accidentally killed a Muggle, a crime that would surely land them in Azkaban. No, wait. Suddenly, Atticus's thoughts halted and a flash of insight crossed his mind. The pressure he exuded for a moment almost made Lawrence, who was recovering from a serious illness, unable to breathe. Chocolate frogs are a well-known candy in the magical world, beloved by young wizards and children from magical families who have not yet reached school age. Because the primary audience is children, these candies have certain safety features. Chocolate frogs don't willingly jump into people's throats. Even if the delivery man had opened the package out of curiosity and seen a frog unlike any he had ever seen before, a hopping and jumping frog, normal logic would dictate that he wouldn't intentionally force it down his throat. Atticus had never heard of anyone choking to death on a chocolate frog in the wizarding world, unless— Tell me, Lawrence. Atticus stood up slowly, looking solemnly at Lawrence, who was drenched in cold sweat. Did someone make that happen? Didn't a chocolate frog fly down this unfortunate muggle's throat? End of this chapter. Chapter 819, A Fight Without a Bottom Line. I was across the road, retrieving my hat from the gap between two buildings. It was a gift from my master, Lawrence recounted, his face pale as he swallowed hard. His heart raced, as if he had been transported back to that rainy day. Just as I retrieved my hat and was about to leave, I heard two distinct noises. Two men appeared on the street, suddenly materializing in front of the postman. Atticus Blaine nodded slightly, casting a reassuring glance at the visibly shaken Lawrence. Sit down and talk, Lawrence. Don't be afraid. They didn't notice you, did they? Sorry, Atticus. I've never witnessed anything so absurd, Lawrence replied, taking his seat as instructed. He removed his reading glasses and wiped them with a napkin, then looked at the young master with a calm expression, feeling a sense of awe. There was a group of people, likely not small in number, possessing extraordinary abilities and their own secretive circle. Whether the organization and the government were aware of their existence was uncertain, but if they were, the government must be aiding them and keeping the public uninformed. Hidden within this world, the young master held a position of status and influence. This was all Lawrence could deduce. One of them pointed a small stick at the postman, who must have realized something was amiss, and then he couldn't move, as if— Lawrence trailed off. Petrified, Atticus interjected. Yes, petrified, Lawrence confirmed, staring into Atticus's inscrutable eyes, his fists clenched beneath the tablecloth. I couldn't hear their conversation, but after petrifying the postman, they inspected the packages he was delivering. They opened a box, waved the stick, and its contents scattered everywhere. They picked out a black chocolate frog and made it fly into the postman's throat. That's what happened. From Atticus's expression, Lawrence knew that everything he described was of great importance to him. He looked at Atticus nervously, sincerely hoping that his account could be of assistance. Yet, he refrained from asking questions out of curiosity. Having served the Blaine family for a lifetime and witnessed many business secrets, Lawrence understood that sometimes the less one knew, the better. Tap, tap, tap. Atticus drummed his fingers on the table a few times before asking, After those two men left, you checked the postman's delivery, didn't you, Lawrence? You're right, Lawrence replied, momentarily lost in thought. The solemn young master resembled his master. During many pivotal moments in the Blaine family's history, when important decisions were made, Lawrence was often by his side. He was familiar with this kind of solemnity, tinged with a hint of indifference. After they left, I hid in the gap for a few minutes. It was raining heavily, and no one was passing by. Before the police arrived, I checked the express delivery and found the sender of the open package. It was Harry Potter, from a village called Hogsmeade. There were two other packages from this address, belonging to Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley. Lawrence remembered the incident vividly. The reason he had been bedridden for a while was not just the cold rain, but also the shock and fright. It was the day Hermione was attacked. Atticus realized this immediately. No wonder, when he saw those three young individuals at the Three Broomsticks bar, they appeared guilty. It turned out they had secretly donated items to the orphanage. He sighed inwardly. Emotionally, he was touched by the kindness of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, but intellectually, Atticus had to admit they were both naive and unfortunate. He himself would occasionally bring special candies from the magical world to the children in the orphanage. Didn't he choose them before sending them? No, with Hermione involved, she would never forget something like this. Unless what happened at that time. Something must have diverted Hermione's attention. Indeed, that was the case. Harry had lost his temper after unexpectedly encountering Cedric and Cho Chang on a date. Hermione was so focused on calming Harry's emotions that it left a mark. It was precisely because of Hermione's distraction that the Ministry of Magic urgently began tracing the package at Hogwarts, which eventually caught the attention of someone with ulterior motives. "I need to see your memory, Lawrence," Atticus Blaine stated firmly. "My memory?" Lawrence was taken aback by the young master's direct request, unsure of its meaning. However, when he noticed Atticus flick his finger, revealing a sleek black wand slipping from his cuff, Lawrence's lips tightened, and he felt an urge to flee. "This is a magic wand. The people you saw are wizards. The method they use to kill the postman is called magic," Atticus explained with a calm smile, observing Lawrence's heavy breathing. "As you may have guessed, I am also a wizard." "A wizard? Magic, this is," Lawrence stammered, his eyes unfocused, murmuring, "It's incredible." "There's something about us, Lawrence," Atticus said gently. "I know you're curious, but it's not convenient for me to reveal too much. What you witnessed is crucial, and I need to see it for myself. Rest assured, extracting your memory won't harm you." "Extract my memory?" Lawrence attempted to smile to lighten the mood, but his expression resembled a grimace. "Sounds like a craniotomy." Taking a deep breath, Lawrence's expression softened. "How do you need me to cooperate?" It felt as if a thread of ice was being pulled from his temple. Lawrence experienced no discomfort, only a faint coolness. He watched as the silver thread extracted from his head wrapped around the tip of Atticus's wand. With a deft flick of his wrist, Atticus set the silver thread spinning rapidly, creating a dazzling halo. With a crisp sound, the halo expanded swiftly under Lawrence's astonished gaze, eventually filling the luxurious small restaurant with a slightly gloomy three-dimensional image. "Incredible," Lawrence murmured, staring at the street that had haunted his nightmares. But Atticus ignored Lawrence's shock. He stepped into the image, approaching the two men in black trench coats and wide-brimmed hats. The scene unfolded quietly, mirroring Lawrence's description. Atticus watched intently, a hint of coldness at the corner of his mouth. However, when the Muggle fell, his expression turned solemn. In the frozen, gloomy world, Atticus closed his eyes. "Foolish," he sighed, questioning whether Delis and the other Auror understood the consequences of their actions. He had just declared to the European wizarding community his intent to dismantle a dark wizarding organization that cruelly targeted Muggles. Yet, here were Aurors from the British Ministry of Magic, under high-level orders, killing innocent Muggles. Such an egregious event could bring down the British Ministry of Magic. Atticus had long known the depths of political struggle, but he hadn't expected such audacity. End of this chapter. Chapter 820, Della's Memory. In the private dining room reserved for the owner of Blaine Manor, Atticus Blaine left the dining table and approached the expansive glass curtain wall. With his hands clasped behind his back, he gazed silently at the lush vegetation in the courtyard, his face devoid of emotion. It was clear that the actions of Deluxe and another Auror were likely directed by higher authorities. Although no formal investigation had been conducted, it wasn't difficult to surmise that the influential female deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic was involved. On the day Hermione was attacked, to express Hogwarts' outrage over the assault on a young wizard, Atticus, along with Dumbledore and Amelia, had stripped her of control over the magical transportation department in the principal's office. Fudge, in need of a scapegoat, had almost tacitly approved Atticus's punishment of Umbridge. Dolores Umbridge was never known for her selflessness or open-mindedness, and her desire for revenge was anticipated. However, the swiftness with which the opportunity presented itself was unexpected, as Harry's well-intentioned actions fell into her trap. Atticus could somewhat predict Umbridge's thoughts. More than 10 days had passed since the incident, and the reason Umbridge hadn't acted immediately was likely because she was waiting for the right moment, or intended to use the situation as leverage. Dumbledore would never allow Harry to be sent to Azkaban. To ensure this, when Umbridge brought the matter to Dumbledore, he would have to make certain concessions, such as using Dumbledore to have himself expelled from Hogwarts. Umbridge was also concerned about her and Dumbledore's standing in the European wizarding world. She needed to ensure that when she decided to use this matter to suppress Atticus and Dumbledore, the majority of the Ministry of Magic would support her. However, now was not the right time for her to make such a move. In silence, Atticus clenched his fists behind his back. He had to admit that Umbridge had posed a challenging dilemma. Without external pressure, revealing the matter now was not a wise choice. A senior official like Umbridge was never isolated. She had a powerful faction within the Ministry of Magic, not to mention Cornelius Fudge backing her. Exposing the issue now would be akin to purging all ministry officials, including the Minister of Magic. The resulting turmoil in the ministry and the British wizarding community would be significant. After all, behind every senior official were one or more pure-blood families. If these families, which had infiltrated the magical world, reached a consensus, many ordinary people in the magical community would face unemployment. Even with Dumbledore's support, calming such a storm might prove difficult. What Dumbledore would do if he learned of this was also uncertain. To mitigate the impact, a more pressing conflict would be needed to divert attention. Atticus, Lawrence, who had been standing silently behind him, finally spoke up. He looked at Atticus's tense profile with concern, his voice hoarse. "Is the person behind those two men who killed the postman targeting you?" Lawrence, a perceptive muggle, easily deduced that there were other instigators behind the crime. The murder, which occurred at the entrance of Harry's orphanage and involved Vernon Dursley's nephew, the boy named Harry Potter, was clearly directed at Atticus. Atticus turned to face Lawrence, who appeared worried, and offered a reassuring smile. He did not. Atticus Blaine didn't lie, but spoke candidly. That seems to be the case, given the current circumstances. However, I must thank you, Lawrence. If you hadn't risked your life to witness this scene, I would have been at a disadvantage when everything unfolded. The situation suggested that these individuals with extraordinary abilities were part of a complex organization, perhaps even a society, and the young master was a part of it, indicating his significant status. Lawrence accepted Atticus's gratitude without false mem. "Odesti," he murmured, "although the Blaine family is now in decline, during my previous life, I was kind to some people. If you need me, I can go." Lawrence understood the fickle nature of loyalty. Despite the master's past assistance to influential figures, the Blaine family's current isolation meant that few would be willing to return the favor. "No need," Atticus replied, observing Lawrence's determined gray eyes, which revealed his readiness to risk everything. Atticus felt a warmth in his heart. "You must realize this isn't your area of expertise. However, I do have a task for you." In a calm and resolute tone, Atticus continued, "This isn't an order, Lawrence," he smiled, "but a suggestion. I hope you'll consider it. There's a complex conspiracy behind this assassination attempt. Fortunately, you haven't been discovered, but that doesn't mean you're safe. I may need you to testify at a trial later. I suggest you temporarily set aside the plan to convert the manor into a welfare college. Pack your bags and head to the Haas orphanage immediately. I'll provide you with a letter from Mrs. Reagan, asking her to accommodate you. Stay there for a few months, and try not to leave until I come for you." Without hesitation, Lawrence agreed. "Is there anything else I should be aware of, Atticus?" "Don't mention what you witnessed to anyone at the orphanage. They still believe I work for a drilling company. If they inquire about my job, feel free to fabricate something." 2 days later, under a mystical moonlit sky, a thunderous explosion shattered the silence. A robust man with gray hair was hurled from the smoke, crashing into a preset magical barrier. The impact left him dazed, his heart pounding painfully. As he struggled to his feet, he tasted blood, a crimson trickle at the corner of his mouth. "Are you insane, Blaine? How dare you attack an Auror from the Ministry of Magic?" Dallas shouted, ignoring his injuries. He clung to the barrier, straining to support himself, and yelled at the figure emerging from the dissipating smoke, exuding a chilling aura. "Openly?" Atticus approached slowly, silhouetted against the moonlight, his face shadowed, but his eyes glowed with a cold purple light, like a reaper from the depths of hell. "Oh, that's not the case, Dallas. I've already taken care of some things." Dallas was momentarily stunned. When he noticed his muggle neighbors on the second-floor balcony, laughing and admiring the moonlight, oblivious to the chaos nearby, his expression darkened. He finally grasped Atticus's meaning. "What on earth are you doing, Blaine?" Dallas growled, like a cornered animal. The creature, wand clutched tightly in hand, aimed it directly at Atticus Blaine. Yet he was acutely aware that the little stick he wielded against Blaine might prove ineffective. "You're fortunate, Dallas. I've dispatched many wizards recently, and tonight I don't plan to add you to that list. I just want." As he drew nearer, Atticus noticed Dallas, who was leaning against the barrier, begin to tremble. His once rugged face betrayed a subtle vulnerability, and his breathing grew erratic. Eventually, his body slowly slid down to the ground. Atticus gazed down at Dallas, who had lost the will to resist, and smiled with indifference. He leaned down slowly, observing Dallas as the purple glow in his eyes seemed to drain his spirit. In a soft voice, Atticus murmured, "Let's take a look at some of the memories you hold dear." End of this chapter.